clearly false pretenses. Where exactly had those funds originated? Marcus called Danielle demanding answers she couldn't provide honestly without admitting to the theft. His parents called him expressing serious concerns about marrying into a family with such troubling ethical issues. His younger sister, who was supposed to be a bridesmaid, quietly removed herself from the wedding party. The Grand Conservatory's event coordinator reached out to Danielle with a carefully worded email asking her to confirm the legitimate source of her deposit payment. They'd received inquiries from concerned parties and needed assurance that all funds were obtained properly. Danielle had no choice but to explain that the money came from her parents who'd received it from me. The coordinator requested written confirmation from me that I'd intended the funds for wedding purposes. I provided no such confirmation. My parents discovered their social isolation gradually, each incident a small cut that collectively became a hemorrhage. The Hendersons, who'd hosted an annual New Year's Eve party my parents had attended for 16 consecutive years, called 3 days after Christmas. They were terribly sorry, but due to space constraints, they were keeping the guest list smaller this year, just immediate family. My mother later learned through mutual acquaintances that the party hosted over 50 guests. My parents simply weren't among them. My father's Thursday night poker group, 5 men who'd been playing cards together since the GM plant days, sent him a group text saying they were taking a break for a few weeks. The break became permanent when one of the wives told my mother at the grocery store that the men had decided they weren't comfortable associating with someone whose character had been so publicly called into question. My mother's book club met without her in early January. She only discovered this when she showed up at the usual host's house at the regular time and found the meeting had been rescheduled to the previous evening without notifying her. When she called demanding an explanation, there was a long, uncomfortable silence before the host said they'd had a discussion about the kind of people we want in our social circle, and decided it would be better if my mother found a different book club. The isolation was methodical and thorough. In a town like Greenfield, reputation isn't just currency, it's everything, and theirs had been devalued to nothing in less than a week. Every grocery store trip became an exercise in avoiding eye contact. Every Sunday at church was a reminder of their fall from grace. Every quiet weekend proved that their social circle had closed entirely without them. I learned about most of this through Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob, who kept me updated partly from concern and partly because they felt I deserved to know the consequences of my actions. I waited for satisfaction to arrive for vindication for some sense of justice being served. Instead, I felt hollow. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Until the letter arrived. The letter arrived on January 14th, a Tuesday. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope immediately, that careful, elegant cursive she'd learned in Catholic school and never abandoned. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive-looking, the kind you buy at specialty stationery stores for important correspondence. My address was written in black ink, precise and beautiful. No return address. I stood in my apartment lobby holding it, debating whether to open it at all. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened to maintain the boundary I'd established to refuse to let them back in, even through paper and words. But curiosity won. Or maybe it was that small, stubborn part of me that still wanted to believe they could change. I waited until I got upstairs to my apartment. 3 pages both sides filled with my mother's meticulous script. It began with, "My dearest Sarah," and I should have known right then, should have recognized the performance in those carefully chosen words, but I kept reading. The first page was pure remorse. She wrote about how the past few weeks had been the darkest of her life. How she'd spent countless hours in reflection and prayer, how she'd finally begun to understand the depth of pain she'd caused me. She used words like reckoning and awakening and profound regret. She described sleepless nights, conversations with their pastor, the beginning of what she called our healing journey as a family. She said she and my father had started couples counseling specifically to address their patterns with me, to understand where they'd gone so terribly wrong, to learn how to become better parents, even at this late stage of all our lives. I felt something crack open in my chest reading that first page. A tiny seed of possibility. Maybe they were finally seeing it. Maybe the social consequences had shocked them into genuine self-examination. Maybe this was the beginning of something real and honest between us. The second page continued in the same vein. She acknowledged specific incidents, naming them with what seemed like genuine accountability. The Christmas seating arrangement, the wedding deposit, the life insurance policy. She didn't make excuses, or at least she claimed she wasn't. She wrote that she understood now how her own childhood trauma had caused her to unconsciously recreate those same patterns with me, how she'd punished me for being strong because she'd hated her own strength. She wrote that Danielle was also seeking therapy, that the whole family was committed to change, to breaking these toxic cycles, to earning back my trust, even if it took years. My eyes were actually wet by the time I reached the third page. I was sitting on my couch, afternoon light slanting through my windows, feeling something that resembled hope for the first time since Christmas. Maybe this was possible. Maybe families really could heal. Maybe all the pain had been necessary to break through to truth. Then I read the final paragraph. Sarah, I want you to know that I'm not writing this to ask for anything from you. But I also need to be honest because honesty is where we must start rebuilding trust. We find ourselves in a very difficult financial position right now. The venue deposits, the holiday expenses, and the loss of some income opportunities for your father due to recent events have left us genuinely struggling. We're behind on the mortgage and facing some very hard decisions. If you could see your way to loaning us $8,000 to help us get through this rough patch, we would be forever grateful. We'll pay you back, of course, as soon as we're financially stable again. But I understand completely if you can't, and this request doesn't change anything I've written above. We love you regardless of what you decide. I read it once, then twice. Then a third time to make absolutely certain I understood what I was seeing. $8,000. After everything. After all of it. After 3 pages of carefully crafted apology and promises of therapy and growth, the letter ended with a request for money. I started laughing. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the kind of laugh that comes from disbelief so complete it has nowhere else to go, the kind that borders on hysteria. I called Rebecca immediately. She answered on the second ring, and I didn't even say hello, just started reading the entire letter out loud from beginning to end. I read all 3 pages, my voice steady until I got to that final paragraph, and then I had to stop because I was laughing again, that bitter, incredulous sound I barely recognized as coming from me. "They're not apologizing," Rebecca said when I finished, her voice flat with disgust. "They're shopping." That phrase hit me like cold water. Shopping. That's exactly what this was. My mother had gone shopping for the right words, the right emotional beats, the right amount of vulnerability to make me open my wallet one more time. The therapy mentions the pastor consultations, the promises of change. All of it was just packaging for the product she actually wanted to sell me. I thanked Rebecca and hung up. The next day, I took the letter to a frame shop and had it professionally mounted behind glass, all 3 pages visible. I hung it on my wall in my home office right where I could see it when I worked. Every time I felt my resolve weakening, every time I wondered if I'd been too harsh, I looked at that framed letter and remembered. They still thought I was a resource, not a person. But my sister had a different plan. Danielle appeared in the lobby of my office building on a Thursday afternoon in late January. I was leaving for the day, tired from back-to-back meetings, thinking about nothing more complicated than what I'd make for dinner. Then I saw her standing near the security desk and my entire body tensed. She looked awful. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. She wore sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, nothing like her usual, carefully curated appearance. When she saw me, her face crumpled and tears started immediately. "Can I please talk to you?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Just for 5 minutes. I'm not here to fight or trick you. I just need to talk. Please." The security guard was watching us. A few of my coworkers were passing through the lobby. This wasn't the place for a scene. I should have walked past her, should have maintained my boundary, should have remembered everything that had happened. But she looked so genuinely broken, so completely destroyed, that something in me softened against my better judgment. 5 minutes, I said. We walked to the coffee shop 2 blocks away, the one I frequented most mornings before work. Danielle kept wiping her eyes, kept apologizing for ambushing me at my office, kept saying she didn't know what else to do. We ordered coffee and sat at a small table in the back corner. She wrapped both hands around her cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth. "I'm finally seeing it," she said quietly, looking down at her coffee. "What Mom and Dad did to us, to you. How they manipulated both of us, turned us against each other, used us for their own purposes. I've been so blind, Sarah. So stupid and selfish and blind." I said nothing, just watched her face carefully, trying to determine if this was genuine. "Mom sent me a copy of that letter she sent you," Danielle continued. "The one where she asked for money after 3 pages of apologies. When I read it, when I saw how she'd written all those pretty words and then asked for $8,000, I felt physically sick. Because I realized she'd do the exact same thing to me eventually. I'm only valuable to them as long as I'm useful." That rang true. That sounded like real insight. I felt my guard lowering slightly despite myself. "Marcus's parents want him to postpone the wedding indefinitely," she said, her voice cracking. "They think I'm manipulative and dishonest, that our whole family is toxic. And they're right. They're completely right. I just couldn't see it before because I was too busy being the favorite to notice what that favoritism cost you." We talked for over an hour. She asked questions about my childhood, about times I'd felt overlooked or dismissed or used. I found myself opening up, explaining things I'd never fully articulated before. The conversation felt therapeutic, like we were finally being honest with each other for the first time in our lives. Then she asked, her tone gentle and curious, "Do you think you went too far, though, with the Christmas thing?" I paused, considering the question seriously. "I don't know. Maybe. It was very public and very harsh. Was humiliating them publicly really necessary?" She tilted her head, genuinely seeming to want to understand. "I wanted them to feel what I'd felt for 38 years, I admitted. Invisible, unimportant, less than. Maybe I could have handled it more privately, but I was so angry. I'm still angry." She nodded sympathetically. "You had every right to be angry. They treated you horribly for your entire life. I just wonder if there might have been a better way, one that didn't blow up everyone's lives quite so publicly." We talked more about anger, about revenge, about whether public exposure had been justified or excessive. I found myself examining my own motivations, critically admitting that yes, maybe I'd wanted to hurt them the way they'd hurt me. Maybe I'd wanted them to suffer. It felt good to acknowledge these darker parts of myself out loud, instead of pretending I'd acted purely from self-defense. When we parted an hour later, Danielle hugged me tightly. She whispered, "I'm so sorry for everything," into my shoulder, and I actually believed her. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks, thinking maybe there was hope for us after all. Maybe we could build something real together. 3 days later, I was at my desk when my phone exploded with notifications. Text messages, social media mentions, emails from people I barely knew. I opened Facebook with a sense of dread, and there it was posted on Danielle's newly reactivated account. The caption read, "My cruel sister admits she wanted to hurt us. Listen to her confess." Below were 3 audio clips, my voice unmistakably mine, saying things like, "Maybe I could have handled it more privately," and "I wanted them to feel what I'd felt," and "Maybe I'd wanted them to suffer." Each clip was under 30 seconds, surgically edited to remove all context, all of Danielle's leading questions, all nuance and explanation. Just my words, isolated and damning, made to sound like cold admissions of vindictive intent. The comments were immediate and brutal. People I'd never met calling me a narcissist, saying I'd manipulated the narrative all along, claiming my true colors were finally showing. Some of the same people who'd supported me after Christmas were now questioning everything, saying they'd been fooled, saying this proved I'd orchestrated the whole thing for attention and sympathy. I sat staring at my phone screen, my hands shaking, understanding flooding through me in cold, sickening waves. She'd recorded the entire coffee shop conversation. The tears, the apologies, the insight about their manipulation, all of it had been performance set-up trap. She'd asked those specific questions to get me to say specific things she could weaponize against me. The war wasn't over. It was evolving. And I needed evidence. The first thing I did after discovering Danielle's betrayal was delete every social media app from my phone. Not deactivate my accounts, just remove the ability to access them. I couldn't control what people were saying about me or what narratives were being spun, but I could absolutely control whether I subjected myself to reading any of it. The constant notifications, the shifting opinions, the strangers who felt entitled to judge my character based on edited audio clips, all of it could exist without my participation. I told my boss what was happening. Not everything, just enough. A family situation had escalated into online harassment that might spill over into my workplace. He was immediately supportive, offering to involve HR if anyone at work created problems, suggesting I take personal days if I needed them. I didn't take the time off. Work became my sanctuary, the one environment where I was still simply Sarah, the operations manager, competent and professional, where my value wasn't up for public debate or social media vote. My real friends rallied without needing to be asked. Rebecca showed up at my apartment that weekend with Thai food and wine, sat with me on the couch, and didn't make me talk unless I wanted to. Aunt Linda called every few days with normal conversation about her garden and her book club, deliberately avoiding the drama unless I brought it up first. These small acts of loyalty, this refusal to treat me like a spectacle or a problem to be solved, kept me grounded when everything else felt like quicksand. But in the quiet hours alone in my apartment after work, I started organizing systematically. I created a folder on my laptop labeled simply documentation and began filling it with methodical precision. Bank statements going back 5 years with every transfer to my parents, or for Danielle's benefit, highlighted in yellow. The totals were staggering when I added them up. Over $40,000 in just those 5 years, not counting the 15 years before that. Email threads about the Christmas dinner went into the folder, showing clearly that I'd made all arrangements under my name. Text messages from my mother requesting money over the years, each ask wrapped in language about family obligation and temporary hardship. Screenshots of Danielle's social media posts claiming credit for the Christmas celebration while never mentioning who funded it. The photo of the life insurance beneficiary form I'd taken in my hallway before returning the document to my mother. Mrs. Chen's recording of the hallway confrontation existed on her phone. I called her and she assured me she'd saved it to multiple locations and would provide it if I ever needed testimony. Then there was Danielle's coffee shop manipulation. What she didn't know, what she'd never thought to check, was that Indiana is a one-party consent state for recordings. I'd had my phone on the table during our entire conversation with a voice recording app open because I'd been using it earlier for work notes. When she started asking those leading questions, some instinct had made me hit record. I had the full 90-minute conversation complete with all her careful prompts and the full context of every statement she'd later weaponized. I backed everything up to cloud storage, and an external hard drive created a detailed timeline, organized it all chronologically. I told myself I was simply being thorough, protecting myself in case things escalated to legal action. But it felt like more than that. It felt like finally seeing the complete pattern. On a Saturday morning in early February, I decided to sort through boxes I'd stored in my closet years ago when I moved out of my childhood home. I found yearbooks, old jewelry photographs. Underneath everything was a manila folder I didn't remember packing. Inside were my elementary school report cards. 3rd grade teacher's note at the bottom. Sarah is frequently exhausted, falls asleep during quiet reading. Possible home situation concern, recommended follow-up. 4th grade. Student continues to show signs of fatigue. Has mentioned parents won't let her use lights in bedroom after 8 p.m. to save electricity, counselor notified. 5th grade. Sarah appears to be taking on adult responsibilities at home. Mentioned caring for younger sister and managing household tasks. Mature beyond years but seems burdened. I sat on my bedroom floor reading these observations from teachers who'd seen something wrong but apparently couldn't intervene or had tried and been dismissed by my parents. The pattern hadn't started at 16 or 18 or 20. It had started when I was 8 years old, maybe earlier. At the bottom of the folder were papers in my own childish handwriting, letters I'd written but never sent. Dear Mom and Dad, why don't you love me like you love Danielle? What did I do wrong? Love, Sarah. Dated on my 12th birthday. Another one undated. I try so hard to be good. I get straight A's. I help with everything. Why am I not enough? 6 letters total, all asking variations of the same heartbreaking question, all evidence of a child who knew something was fundamentally wrong but blamed herself for it. I wasn't building a case. I was uncovering a lifetime of evidence that already existed. I spent hours that Saturday reading and rereading those childhood letters, trying to connect with the little girl who'd written them. The handwriting was careful, each letter formed with the precision of someone who'd been taught that penmanship mattered. The paper was lined notebook paper, some pages carefully torn from spiral-bound notebooks with the edges still ragged. Each letter started the same way, Dear Mom and Dad. One letter, written in purple crayon when I must have been about 9 years old, asked the question I'd completely forgotten. Am I adopted? Is that why you don't love me the same as Danielle? I promise I'll be even better if you tell me the truth. I stared at that sentence for a long time, remembering the day I'd written it. It was right after Danielle's birthday party, an elaborate celebration with 20 children and a bounce house and a custom princess cake. My own birthday 3 months earlier had been acknowledged with a grocery store sheet cake and dinner at home with just the 4 of us. I remembered asking my mother directly if I was adopted. She'd laughed, actually laughed, and told me not to be ridiculous. But she never explained why everything felt so fundamentally different between how they treated me and how they treated Danielle. She never acknowledged the disparity existed at all. So I'd gone to my room and written that letter in purple crayon, convinced adoption was the only logical explanation for feeling like a stranger in my own family. Christmas hadn't been the beginning of their mistreatment. It had been the culmination, the moment when decades of careful cruelty finally became too obvious to ignore or rationalize away. The abuse hadn't suddenly started. I'd just finally stopped making excuses for it. By Monday, I knew I needed professional help processing all of this. I found Dr. Patricia Morrison through a referral from Rebecca, who'd seen her own therapist for family issues years ago. Dr. Morrison specialized in dysfunctional family dynamics, particularly what she called adult children of narcissistic families. Our first session was Wednesday evening. Her office was warm and comfortable, filled with plants and soft lighting. She was in her mid-60s with steel gray hair and observant eyes that seemed to understand things before I finished explaining them. I brought the folder of evidence with me, uncertain if that was appropriate, but needing her to see that I wasn't imagining this, that it was all documented and real. I told her everything. Christmas dinner, the stolen money, the insurance policy, Danielle's recording. Then I showed her the childhood report cards and the letters I'd never sent. She read through everything, carefully taking notes, occasionally nodding as if something was confirming a suspicion she already had. When she finally looked up, her expression was serious but compassionate. Sarah, what you're describing is a textbook case of golden child scapegoat dynamic. Your parents assigned you both roles before either of you was old enough to understand or consent to them, and those roles shaped absolutely everything that followed. She explained it in terms that made terrible, perfect sense. In dysfunctional family systems, children serve the parents' emotional needs rather than being seen as individuals with their own needs. The golden child exists to provide validation and vicarious achievement. The scapegoat exists to absorb blame and be useful to justify the parent's limitations, by being the difficult one who requires so much that the parents couldn't possibly do more. Neither role is actually love, Dr. Morrison said gently. Both are forms of objectification. Your sister was valued for being decorative and dependent. You were valued for being functional and self-sufficient. Neither of you was seen as a complete person deserving of unconditional love. I sat in her office crying, feeling both validated and devastated simultaneously. For 38 years, I'd believed something was wrong with me, that I wasn't lovable enough, that I needed to try harder. Now I was learning the problem had never been me. The system was rigged from the beginning. "This wasn't your fault," Dr. Morrison said, and those words broke something fundamental loose inside me. This was never your fault. The following week, a woman named Jennifer Walsh from the Indianapolis Star contacted me. She'd been following my story through community connections and social media. She was working on a feature article about adult children who experience financial exploitation from their own families, a phenomenon she'd noticed increasing in her reporting. Would I be willing to be interviewed? My immediate response was no. I'd had enough publicity, enough exposure, enough of being the subject of other people's conversations and judgments. "I understand your hesitation," Jennifer said, "but I want you to know why I'm pursuing this story. In the last year alone, I've spoken with dozens of adult children who've been financially exploited by their parents, and almost none of them recognized it as abuse until someone else named it for them. Your story could help other invisible daughters see their own situations clearly." I told her I'd think about it. That's when my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, a voice I'd never heard, a story I needed. I answered, still thinking about Jennifer Walsh's words about helping other invisible daughters. "Hello, is this Sarah Mitchell?" The voice was elderly female with a slight accent I couldn't immediately place. There was a tremor in it, emotion or age or both. "Yes, this is Sarah. My name is Margaret Chen. You don't know me, but I think I believe you're the girl I helped a very long time ago." She paused, taking a breath. "I saw your story on CNN. They did a segment about family financial abuse last night. When they showed your picture and mentioned you grew up in Greenfield, I knew it had to be you." I sat down slowly on my couch, confused. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. How did you help me?" "I lived on Maple Street in Greenfield," she said carefully. "3 houses down from your family. The blue house with the garden. This was back in the late 90s. Do you remember?" A vague image surfaced, a blue house, an elderly woman who was always working in her yard. I'd seen her from a distance, maybe waved in passing, but we'd never had any real interaction that I could recall. "I remember the house, but I don't remember you helping me with anything." "I need to tell you something I should have told you 20 years ago," Mrs. Chen said. "I made a promise to keep it secret, and I kept that promise until last night. But when I saw you on television, saw what you've been through, I realized you deserved to know the truth." She told me a story I'd completely forgotten. The summer of 1998, when I was 16, I'd earned a partial scholarship to the local community college. It would have covered tuition if I could manage books and transportation costs. My parents had refused to let me accept it. Mrs. Chen had overheard the argument from her porch one evening, my mother's voice carrying across the yards in the summer heat. "Girls don't need college education. You'll just get married and have babies anyway. We need you working and contributing to this household, not wasting time and money on school." "I saw you after that," Mrs. Chen continued, her voice soft with memory. "Late at night, almost 11 o'clock sometimes, sitting under the streetlight on the corner. You'd have textbooks spread out on the curb, reading by that harsh fluorescent light. I watched you for 2 weeks straight, studying under that streetlight in the July heat, and I finally understood why. Your parents wouldn't let you use the lights in your bedroom after 8 p.m. They said you were wasting electricity." The memory came flooding back with shocking clarity. That suffocating summer. The streetlight on the corner of Maple and Oak. Sitting on the concrete curb with mosquitoes buzzing around me, squinting at textbook pages, determined to keep learning, even though they'd said no to college. I'd forgotten I'd done that. I'd buried it with so many other painful memories. I saw myself in you, Mrs. Chen said. I was the strong daughter in my own family in Taiwan. My brothers went to university while I worked in my father's shop. They told me girls didn't need education. When I was 25, I bought a ticket to America and never looked back. But I always wondered what would have happened if someone had helped me when I was your age. She explained that she'd gone to my high school counselor, a woman named Mrs. Patterson. Mrs. Chen had offered to fund a scholarship anonymously through what would appear to be a church program. She gave them $10,000 to cover my community college tuition and books for 2 years. They created official-looking paperwork that made it seem like a legitimate church educational fund. My parents couldn't refuse it without looking terrible to their church community, and they couldn't access the money directly because it went straight to the school. That was you, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. The First Methodist Church Scholarship. That was me. I watched you succeed, Sarah. I watched you graduate from community college and transfer to university. I followed your career from a distance through people we both knew in town. I was so proud of you. And I never told you because I'd promised your counselor I'd stay anonymous. And because I knew if your parents found out the source, they'd find some way to make you feel guilty or take it away. Why are you telling me now? I asked through my tears. Because you need to know that someone believed in you. Someone saw you when you were 16 years old studying under a streetlight and knew you deserved more than what your family was giving you. I knew what you needed was someone to believe in you. She saved my life before I even knew I needed saving. But why now? Why now? I asked again, needing to understand. Because I'm 72 years old, Sarah. I don't know how many years I have left to make things right. When I saw you on that television screen last night, saw what you've been through, I realized I didn't want to die with this secret. You deserve to know that someone believed in you back then. And I wanted to meet you if you'd be willing. I wanted to see the woman you became. We arranged to meet for tea the following Saturday at a small tea room in downtown Indianapolis, a place Mrs. Chen suggested because she said it reminded her of the tea houses in Taipei from her childhood. I arrived 10 minutes early, nervous in a way I couldn't quite explain, and found her already seated at a corner table near the window. She was small and elegant, probably no more than 5 feet tall, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore a simple jade necklace and carried herself with a quiet dignity that suggested someone who'd survived difficult things and emerged stronger. When she saw me, her face transformed with a smile that held equal parts joy and relief. She stood, and without thinking, I found myself moving toward her and embracing her. She was tiny in my arms, barely reaching my shoulder, but her embrace was firm and real, and somehow safe in a way I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. When we pulled apart, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Look at you," she said softly, reaching up to touch my cheek briefly. "You're even more beautiful than I imagined." We sat and ordered tea and delicate sandwiches, and for the first few minutes we just looked at each other, both of us seeming to understand that this moment carried a significance that went beyond words. "Tell me about your life," I said finally. "Please. I want to know everything." Mrs. Chen Margaret, she insisted I call her, told me her story. She'd been born in Taipei in 1953, the eldest of 4 children and the only daughter. Her father owned a small fabric shop her mother took in sewing work to help make ends meet. From the age of 10, Margaret was expected to work in the shop every day after school and all day on weekends, contributing every dollar she earned to the family, while her 3 younger brothers were sent to good schools, encouraged in their studies, groomed for professional careers. When I was 22, they arranged a marriage for me, she said, her hands wrapped around her teacup. A man I'd never met. He was older, needed a wife to care for his aging mother. My parents told me I should be grateful for the opportunity, that this was my purpose as a daughter. She paused, looking out the window at the winter street. I said no. Her family had disowned her immediately. She'd worked in a textile factory for 3 years, sleeping in a boarding house with 5 other women, eating 1 meal a day to save money. At 25, she'd saved enough to buy a one-way ticket to San Francisco with money she'd hidden in the lining of her suitcase, terrified her family would find it and take it back. I arrived in America with $50 and maybe 50 words of English, she said. But I knew I couldn't stay in Taiwan and become what they wanted me to be, a woman who served everyone else until there was nothing left of herself. She'd worked as a seamstress, cleaned houses, attended English classes at night at a community center. Slowly, painfully, she'd built a life. By 30, she'd opened a small import business bringing Taiwanese textiles to American markets. By 40, she owned 3 stores across Indiana. By 50, she'd sold the business and retired comfortably, though she'd continued volunteering and staying active in the Taiwanese American community. I never married, she said, and there was a trace of something, not regret exactly, but acknowledgement of absence. I was too afraid of losing myself again, of falling back into that role where I disappeared to serve someone else. And I never had children, though I felt that absence every day. When I moved to Greenfield in 1995, I thought I'd live quietly, tend my garden, maybe volunteer at the library. She looked at me intently. Then I saw you. For 3 years I watched you, Sarah. I saw how hard you worked, how you took care of Danielle, how your parents took everything you gave and asked for more while treating your sister like precious porcelain. I saw myself so clearly in you it physically hurt. And when I heard them refuse your scholarship that summer, when I saw you studying under that streetlight night after night, I knew exactly what I had to do. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked. Why stay anonymous? Because I was afraid your parents would find out and sabotage it somehow. They'd make you feel guilty, or they'd demand I give them money too, or they'd find some way to corrupt what should have been pure. And because the scholarship needed to be something you believed you'd earned, not something someone gave you out of pity. I wanted you to know you deserved it because you did. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was soft with age, but her grip was strong. I never had a daughter of my own, Sarah. But if I had, I would have wanted her to be exactly like you. Smart and strong and resilient and kind despite everything. When I funded that scholarship, I wasn't just helping a neighbor girl. I was breaking the cycle that had broken me. I was doing for you what no one did for me. My throat was tight. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, but I want you to understand something important. She squeezed my hand. That scholarship wasn't charity. It was investment. I invested in your future because I believed in you when you were 16 years old and your own parents didn't. And you took that investment and you built a life. You got your education. You built a career. You finally stood up to people who were using you. Do you know how grateful I am? How proud I am that I got to play even a small part in helping you become who you are. It wasn't a small part, I managed to say, my voice breaking. It was everything. Without that scholarship, I don't know if I would have made it to college. My parents would have kept me trapped, kept me working and giving them money forever. You gave me a way out. You gave yourself the way out, she corrected gently. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it. You're the one who kept walking even when it was hard, even when they gave you every reason to quit. That strength was always yours, Sarah. I just made sure it had somewhere to go. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I didn't try to stop them. These weren't tears of pain or anger or frustration like I'd cried so many times before. These were different. These were tears of recognition and gratitude and grief for all the years I'd spent thinking I was completely alone. Margaret told me more about her life over the next hour. Her love of gardening, her volunteer work helping other immigrant women navigate American systems, her quiet friendships, her peaceful solitude. She showed me photos on her phone of the blue house in Greenfield, the garden I barely remembered. She told me she'd moved to Indianapolis 5 years ago to be closer to medical facilities as she aged, but she still thought of Greenfield as home in her heart. I've been following your career for all these years, she admitted. through mutual connections, through the community network. I heard when you got promoted. I heard when you bought your apartment. I was always watching from a distance, always hoping you were happy, always ready to help again, if I could do so without revealing myself. Why reveal yourself now? I asked again. Because hiding helped you then, but hiding hurts you now. You need to know that you've been seen, Sarah, really seen, not by people who should have seen you and didn't, but by someone who recognized what you were worth and chose to invest in it. You need to know that the validation you've been searching for from your family, you already had it. You just didn't know where it was coming from. When we finally left the tea room 3 hours later, Margaret hugged me tightly. "Can we do this again?" she asked. "Can I be part of your life now openly instead of in secret?" "Please," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I would love that." I finally had the mother I needed, just not the one I was born to. Meeting Margaret changed something fundamental in me. For the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be truly seen by a maternal figure, to be valued not for what I could provide, but simply for who I was. That knowledge made me stronger, but it also made me clearer about what I would and wouldn't accept from my blood family going forward. So when Danielle appeared at my apartment door on a rainy Tuesday evening in early March, I was surprised, but not unprepared. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup hiding the dark circles under her eyes that suggested weeks of poor sleep. She wore sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, nothing like her usual carefully constructed appearance. When she saw me, her face crumpled, but she didn't start crying immediately this time. She just stood there looking utterly defeated. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. "I'm not recording anything. I'm not here to trick you. I just need to talk to you. Please." I stepped aside and let her in. She walked to my couch and sat down slowly, carefully, her hands clasped between her knees. I sat across from her in the armchair, waiting, not offering comfort or condemnation. Just waiting. "The recording was Dad's idea," she said, finally staring at her hands. "He told me to do it. He said you'd ruined the family and we needed something to fight back with, something to prove you weren't the victim you were pretending to be. And I went along with it because I was angry and desperate and I didn't know what else to do." She looked up at me, her eyes bloodshot and genuine. "I regret it. I regret all of it. Marcus's parents saw what I did online, and now they're demanding we postpone the wedding indefinitely. They're saying I'm manipulative and dishonest, that I've shown my true character, and they don't want their son legally tied to our family. Marcus is still defending me, but barely. Everything is completely falling apart." I said nothing, just continued watching her carefully. I'd learned that silence often revealed more truth than questions ever could. "There's something else," she said, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. "Something I need to tell you. Something that explains why Mom and Dad were so frantic about the wedding money." She pulled the hoodie tighter around herself, and that's when I noticed it. The slight curve of her abdomen barely visible, but unmistakable once I knew to look for it. "I'm pregnant," she said. 4 months. I got pregnant in November, right after we got engaged, before Christmas." The pieces clicked together with sudden, ugly clarity. The rushed Valentine's Day wedding, my mother's desperate stress about wedding costs, the immediate transfer of my $15,000. They hadn't just needed money for a wedding. They'd needed it for a shotgun wedding arranged quickly before my sister started showing, before the whole town could count backward from birth to wedding and know the truth. Mom and Dad wanted everything to happen fast. Danielle continued, her voice shaking. "Before I started showing, they were terrified of what people would think of the gossip of having an unmarried pregnant daughter. Your money was supposed to solve everything, pay for a rushed but elegant wedding, make it look romantic instead of desperate. Get me married before anyone could do the math." She laughed, but it was bitter and broken. "But then you canceled Christmas and everything exploded publicly, and now Marcus's family knows I'm pregnant, and they know the wedding was rushed because of it, and they're pulling all their financial support." They were going to help us with a house down payment. Now they're saying Marcus needs to think very carefully about his future before making permanent decisions. I sat with this information feeling something between vindication and sadness. The betrayal had been even more calculated than I'd realized. They'd used me to cover up what they viewed as my sister's shame. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. Danielle's hands moved unconsciously to her stomach, a protective gesture. "Because I need you to know I'm genuinely sorry. Really, truly sorry. And because—" she looked up at me with something raw and vulnerable in her eyes. "Because I'm terrified, Sarah. I'm terrified I'm going to turn into Mom. I'm going to have a daughter and resent her for being strong, or I'm going to have 2 children and play favorites, or I'm going to repeat all the same patterns we grew up with. And I don't know how to not do that because it's all I've ever known." She was crying now. Really crying, not the performed tears I'd seen before, but deep, racking sobs. Can you... She struggled to get the words out. "Can you let the baby bring us together? Can this be a fresh start, for the baby's sake?" I sat with the question, feeling its weight. This was the moment where I could choose to perpetuate the cycle or try to break it. But breaking it didn't mean pretending the past hadn't happened. "A baby doesn't erase what you did," I said quietly but firmly. "It doesn't erase the recording or the stolen money or the 38 years before that. A baby just means there's a child who deserves better than this toxic pattern we grew up in." Danielle's face fell slightly, hope dimming. "But," I continued, "it also means you have a choice. You can choose to do better. You can choose therapy, real therapy, to examine why you did what you did and how to break these patterns. I can support that choice, but I can't support pretending nothing happened just because there's a baby coming." She broke down completely, then her whole body shaking with sobs that sounded like they came from somewhere deep and genuinely frightened. "I don't know how to be a good mother," she whispered through tears. "I don't even know what that looks like." For the first time in our lives, she'd shown me something completely real. I could forgive, but I couldn't forget, and I wouldn't pretend. Meeting Margaret changed something fundamental in me. For the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be seen and valued by a maternal figure, to be treated as worthy, not for what I could provide, but simply for who I was. That knowledge made me stronger, but it also made me clearer about what I would and wouldn't accept from my blood family going forward. So when Danielle appeared at my apartment door on a Tuesday evening in early March, I was surprised but not unprepared. She looked genuinely awful. Her hair was unwashed and pulled back in a loose ponytail, her face free of makeup, dark circles under her eyes that suggested weeks of poor sleep. She wore sweatpants and an old college hoodie I remembered from years ago, nothing like her usual carefully styled appearance. When she saw me, tears started immediately, but they seemed real this time, not performed. "Can I please come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not recording anything. I'm not here to trick you or manipulate you. I just need to talk to you. Please." I stepped aside and let her in. She walked to my couch and sat down heavily, her hands clasped tightly between her knees. I sat across from her in the armchair, waiting, offering neither comfort nor condemnation. Just waiting. "The recording was Dad's idea," she said finally, the words rushing out like she'd been holding them back too long. "He told me to do it. He said you'd destroyed our family, and we needed something to fight back with, something to make people see you weren't the victim you were pretending to be. And I went along with it because I was angry and scared and I didn't know what else to do." She looked up at me, her eyes genuinely pleading. "But I regret it, Sarah. I regret all of it. Marcus's parents saw what I did and now they're demanding we postpone the wedding indefinitely. They're saying I'm manipulative and dishonest, that our whole family is toxic, and they don't want their son tied to us. Marcus is still defending me, but barely. Everything is completely falling apart." I said nothing, just continued watching her carefully. Silence, I'd learned, often revealed more than questions ever could. "There's something else," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "Something I need to tell you. Something that explains why Mom and Dad were so desperate for that wedding money. She pulled the hoodie tighter around herself, and that's when I noticed it. The slight swell of her abdomen barely visible but unmistakable once you knew to look for it. "I'm pregnant?" She said the words coming out flat and exhausted. 4 months along. I got pregnant in November right after we got engaged. Before Christmas even happened. The pieces assembled themselves with sudden, ugly clarity. The rushed wedding plans in January. My mother's frantic stress about wedding costs back in October and November. The desperate need for my $15,000. They hadn't just been planning a wedding. They'd been trying to orchestrate a shotgun wedding before Danielle started showing, before the whole town could count backward from a due date and do the math. Mom and Dad wanted the wedding to happen as fast as possible before anyone could tell I was pregnant. Danielle continued, her voice shaking. They were terrified of what people would think of the gossip of having an unwed pregnant daughter in a town like Greenfield. Your money was supposed to solve everything, pay for a quick Valentine's Day wedding, make it look romantic and planned instead of desperate and necessary. Get me married before I started showing and people started counting months. She laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound. But then you canceled Christmas and everything exploded, and now Marcus's family knows I'm pregnant, and they know the wedding was being rushed because of it. They were going to help us with a down payment on a house. Now they're saying Marcus needs to think very carefully about his future before making any permanent commitments. I absorbed this information, feeling a strange combination of vindication and sadness. The betrayal had been even more calculated than I'd realized. They hadn't just used me. They'd used me to cover up what they viewed as my sister's shame. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. Danielle's hands moved unconsciously to her stomach, a protective gesture that looked instinctive. "Because I need you to know I'm sorry, really, truly sorry for everything, and because—" She looked up at me, and for the first time in our lives, I saw something real and raw in her eyes, not performance. "Because I'm absolutely terrified, Sarah. I'm terrified I'm going to turn into Mom. I'm going to have this baby, and I'm going to resent her if she's strong, or I'm going to play favorites if I have more than one, or I'm going to do all the horrible things that were done to you. And I don't know how not to do that because it's all I've ever seen." Her voice cracked completely. Can you let the baby bring us back together? Can this be a fresh start? Please, for the baby's sake, if not for mine." I sat with her question for a long moment, feeling the weight of it. This was a crossroads. I could choose to perpetuate the cycle, or I could choose to break it. But breaking it didn't mean pretending the past hadn't happened. "A baby doesn't erase what you did," I said quietly but firmly. "It doesn't erase the recording or the stolen money or the 32 years of being invisible before any of that. A baby just means there's a child coming into this world who deserves better than this toxic pattern we all grew up in." Danielle's face fell. "But," I continued carefully, "it also means you have a choice now. You can choose to do better. You can choose to get real therapy to examine why you did what you did, to actively work on not becoming Mom. I can support that choice, but I can't support pretending nothing happened just because there's a baby on the way." She broke down, then really broke down, her whole body shaking with sobs that sounded like they came from someplace deep and terrified inside her. "I don't know how to be a good mother," she whispered through her tears. "I don't even know what that looks like." For the first time in our entire relationship, I believed she was telling me the complete truth. I could forgive, but I couldn't forget, and I wouldn't pretend. I let Danielle cry for several minutes, then handed her a box of tissues from the side table. When she'd collected herself enough to look at me again, I spoke carefully, choosing each word with deliberate precision. "I'll be in your baby's life," I said. "I'll be an aunt who shows up, who cares, who's present and supportive. But there are conditions, Danielle. Clear conditions that aren't negotiable." Her face showed a mixture of relief and wariness. "What conditions?" "First, you need to get into therapy. Not couples counseling with Marcus, though that might help too. Individual therapy with someone who specializes in family dysfunction and generational trauma. You need to understand why you did what you did, not just feel bad about it. Guilt without understanding just leads to repeating the same patterns with different players. She nodded slowly, not arguing yet. Second, Mom and Dad cannot use this baby as a manipulation tool. They don't get to leverage your child's existence to force reconciliation or extract money or create situations where I'm expected to play happy family and pretend the past didn't happen. If they try to use your baby that way, I will remove myself from the situation completely, and you need to support that boundary, even if it's uncomfortable for you. Sarah, that's not really fair to ask me to, she started, but I continued. Third, you need to genuinely account for your actions. Not just say you're sorry, but actually articulate what you did wrong and why it was wrong. The Christmas money being used for your wedding, the recording at the coffee shop, the 32 years of participating and making me invisible while you enjoyed being the favorite, all of it. You need to own it, fully understand it deeply before we can build anything new between us. Danielle's expression was shifting from vulnerable to defensive, her walls starting to go back up. This sounds like you're punishing me. I came here to apologize and try to make things right, and you're giving me a list of demands like I'm some kind of criminal on probation. I'm giving you a roadmap, I corrected gently but firmly. These aren't punishments, Danielle. They're the foundation for an actual healthy relationship. If you can't meet these conditions, then what you're really asking for isn't reconciliation. It's rug sweeping. You want me to pretend nothing happened so you can feel better and your life can be easier. And I won't do that, not even for your baby. You're making this so difficult, she said, her voice rising with frustration that was starting to edge toward anger. I'm pregnant and scared and trying my best to fix things, and you're making it nearly impossible. I'm making it honest, I replied, keeping my voice calm and level. There's a difference between difficult and honest. Honest means we acknowledge what happened, we understand why it happened, and we actively work to make sure it doesn't happen again. Difficult would be if I was asking you to do something unreasonable or punitive. I'm asking you to grow and change and take responsibility. That's just honest. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse from where she'd set it on the floor. I thought you'd changed, Sarah. I thought after everything you'd been through, you'd understand about forgiveness and moving forward and not holding grudges forever. I stood too, meeting her eyes with steady certainty. I have changed. I have boundaries now. I know my worth. I won't accept scraps anymore, not even emotional scraps disguised as reconciliation. If you want a real relationship with me, it's going to be an honest one built on accountability and change. Or it's going to be nothing at all. Fine, she snapped, heading for the door with quick, angry steps. I should have known better than to come here. You're just like Mom, after all, cold and unforgiving and impossible to please. No, I said to her back, my voice quiet but clear enough to make her pause with her hand on the doorknob. Mom pretended everything was fine while treating me like I was disposable. I'm telling you the truth and giving you a real choice. That's the exact opposite of what she did. She left without another word, the door closing hard enough to make the frame shudder. I stood in my living room listening to her footsteps recede down the hallway, feeling the familiar ache of rejection but also something new and solid underneath it. Peace. I'd said what needed to be said. I'd been clear and kind and firm all at once. Whatever happened next was Danielle's choice to make, not my responsibility to manage. 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up on the fourth ring. Sarah, this is Marcus, Danielle's fiancé. We met briefly at your parents' house last Thanksgiving, though I don't know if you remember me. I remembered him vaguely, a quiet man with kind eyes who'd seemed uncomfortable throughout that entire dinner, saying little and looking like he wished he were anywhere else. Hi, Marcus. What can I do for you? I wanted to thank you, he said, and there was genuine emotion in his voice. For what you said to Danielle the other night. For saying what I've been afraid to say for months now. I sat down slowly on my couch. What do you mean? My family has been seeing red flags in how Danielle's family operates since we got engaged. The way they talk about you, the way they handle money and relationships, the way they treat Danielle like she's incapable of functioning without them managing everything for her. When the Christmas situation happened, my parents wanted me to call off the wedding entirely. I've been trying to defend her, trying to believe it's not as bad as it looks, trying to convince myself and my family that she's different from them. He paused, and I heard him take a breath. When she came home from your apartment the other night, she was furious. She told me about your conditions for being in the baby's life and said you were being unreasonable and cruel. And for the first time since we got engaged, I told her I thought you were completely right. That therapy wasn't unreasonable. That boundaries with her parents weren't unreasonable. That accountability and genuine change weren't unreasonable. We had a huge fight. She's barely speaking to me right now. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Don't be. I needed to say it, and hearing that you'd already said it gave me the courage to finally be honest with her. Sarah. I love Danielle, but I'm terrified of raising a child in the same toxic dynamic she grew up in. I don't want our daughter to become the next generation's scapegoat, and I don't want to enable Danielle becoming the next version of your mother. Your daughter? I asked softly, catching that detail. We found out last week. It's a girl. His voice held tenderness mixed with fear. Sarah, would you be willing to meet with both of us together? To talk through all of this with me there too? I think Danielle needs to hear from both of us that we want the same thing for this baby. A healthier family dynamic. Real accountability. Genuine change. Maybe if it's not just you setting boundaries, if she sees that I support those same boundaries, she'll understand this isn't about punishment or cruelty. It's about protection. I thought about Margaret, about breaking cycles, about how change required allies and courage, and people willing to speak hard truths. Yes, I said. I'll meet with both of you. Thank you, he said quietly. Thank you for caring enough about my daughter to not just accept whatever scraps Danielle offers. After we hung up, I sat in the growing evening light thinking about that little girl who would be born in a few months, who would enter a family with so much dysfunction and so much potential for repeating painful patterns. I thought about whether my boundaries would help break the cycle, or whether I'd end up being the aunt who had to protect another invisible grandchild from the same treatment I'd endured. Maybe the baby would break the cycle. Or maybe I'd be protecting another invisible grandchild. The meeting with Marcus and Danielle was scheduled for the following week, which gave me time to process everything in my ongoing therapy sessions with Dr. Morrison. She'd become someone I relied on not for answers, but for asking exactly the right questions that helped me find my own clarity. You've spent the last 4 months dealing with your family's reactions to your boundaries, she said during our session that Thursday. You've navigated betrayal, public exposure, your sister's manipulation, and now her pregnancy. But I want to ask you something different. What do you actually need from your parents to move forward? I opened my mouth to say what I'd always said, what I'd believed for 38 years, that I needed them to acknowledge what they'd done, to apologize sincerely, to finally see me and value me the way they'd always valued Danielle. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I sat with the question, really sat with it, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. I don't need anything from them, I said finally, and the realization felt both freeing and sad at the same time. I don't need an apology anymore. I don't need acknowledgement or validation or any kind of recognition. I just need them to leave me alone. Dr. Morrison nodded slowly, encouraging me to continue. For my entire life, I've been trying to earn something from them, their approval, their love, their attention. And I finally understand that I can't earn what they're not capable of giving. They can't see me the way I needed to be seen because they fundamentally don't know how. My mother is trapped in her own cycle of pain from her childhood. My father enabled it all. And I don't need them to change anymore because I've stopped making their limitations about my worth. That's not indifference, Sarah, Dr. Morrison said gently. That's acceptance. You've accepted who they are and who they're not. and you've stopped waiting for them to give you something they'll never have. The clarity I felt after that session gave me the courage to call Jennifer Walsh, the newspaper reporter who'd reached out weeks ago. When I told her I'd agreed to the interview, her gratitude was immediate and genuine. We met at a quiet coffee shop the following Monday afternoon. She spent nearly 3 hours listening to my story with the kind of focused, empathetic attention that told me she understood the importance of getting every detail right. She asked thoughtful questions, never pushed me beyond what I was comfortable sharing, and took meticulous notes. "I'm not interested in this being a revenge piece," I told her clearly. "I don't want it to be about punishing my family or making them look bad. I want it to help other women recognize these patterns, the financial exploitation, the emotional manipulation, the way some families assign roles to their children and then punish them for those roles." Jennifer nodded, her pen moving steadily across her notebook. "That's exactly the angle I want to take. I've been researching family financial abuse for months, and your story illustrates patterns that are far more common than people realize. Most adult children who experience this don't even recognize it as abuse until someone names it for them." She told me the article would run in early May, giving her time to interview experts on family dynamics and financial exploitation and to gather additional anonymous stories from other women who'd experienced similar treatment. She promised I could review my quotes before publication to ensure nothing was taken out of context or misrepresented. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said as we prepared to leave. "I think your story is going to help more people than you realize." 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived at my apartment. The return address was a law firm in Greenfield, the name embossed in conservative serif font. My hands were steady as I opened it, though I knew before reading what it would contain. The letter was 2 full pages of dense legal language demanding that I immediately cease and desist from making false and defamatory statements about Richard Mitchell and Patricia Mitchell. It accused me of engaging in a deliberate campaign of harassment and character assassination designed to cause emotional distress and damage to reputation. It warned that continued publication of malicious falsehoods and libelous claims would result in legal action for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and any other applicable causes of action. The letter specifically referenced the upcoming newspaper article, demanding that I withdraw my participation immediately and publicly retract all previous statements. I read it twice, feeling a strange disconnect between the threatening legal language and my actual emotional response. Part of me recognized I should feel scared or intimidated. Part of me was simply tired of their inability to ever take genuine accountability. But mostly, I just felt done. Completely done. I called my friend David, who practiced civil law in Indianapolis. I read him the entire letter over the phone, including all the formal legal threats and demands. There was a long pause after I finished, and then he started laughing. "Sarah, they have absolutely zero case here. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation. Everything you've said is documented and provable. The bank transfers the insurance policy, the witnesses to their behavior, the recording of their hallway confrontation. You have evidence for every single claim. This letter is pure intimidation, nothing more. No competent attorney would actually file this lawsuit because they'd know they'd lose immediately and could face sanctions for bringing a frivolous claim. So I can just ignore it. You can frame it and hang it on your wall next to your mother's letter if you want," he said, still chuckling. "But legally speaking, yes, you can completely ignore it. If they're foolish enough to actually file suit, which I seriously doubt will respond appropriately, but my professional opinion. This is their last desperate attempt to control a narrative they've already lost control of. Don't let it work." I thanked him and ended the call, looking at the letter again. My parents had hired an attorney to threaten me into silence rather than simply leaving me alone. They were willing to spend money they didn't have on legal fees instead of accepting that their actions had consequences. It would have hurt more if I still needed their approval. Instead, it just confirmed everything I already knew about who they were. Let them sue. I had something better than a lawyer. I had a community. Jennifer Walsh's article ran in the Indianapolis Star on Sunday, May 5th. The headline read, "The Invisible Daughter When Family Love Comes with a Price Tag." It was a full-page feature in the Sunday Lifestyle section, complete with a photo of me looking directly at the camera, my expression neither angry nor victimized but simply clear and honest. The article was everything Jennifer had promised it would be. She told my story with sensitivity and accuracy, but placed it within a larger context of family financial abuse that affected thousands of adult children across the country. She'd interviewed Dr. Morrison about scapegoat dynamics. She'd spoken with financial experts about how to recognize when family relationships have become exploitative. She included anonymous quotes from 3 other women who'd experienced similar patterns with their own families. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The newspaper's website traffic spiked so dramatically they had to upgrade their servers. Letters poured into the editor from readers sharing their own stories of being the family caregiver who gave everything and received nothing. Local television stations picked up the story, then regional news networks. Within 3 days, a segment aired on CNN about family financial abuse using my story as the central example. That's when Margaret called me. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told me over the phone. "About how you don't want this to be about revenge, but about helping other women recognize these patterns. I have an idea if you're willing." She explained that she wanted to start a GoFundMe campaign, not because I needed the money, but as a symbolic gesture. She wanted to call it, "Help the Strong Daughter Return Her Christmas Gift." The goal would be to raise the $15,000 my parents had taken and used for Danielle's wedding. But the real purpose was to create a platform where other women could share their own stories of family exploitation in the comments. "It's not about the money, Sarah," she said. "It's about visibility. It's about showing every invisible daughter out there that she's not alone, that what happened to her has a name that she deserves better." I agreed, and Margaret launched the campaign that afternoon. She wrote a description that was factual and compassionate, linking to Jennifer's article, and explaining that all funds raised would go toward helping me establish a support organization for adult children experiencing family financial abuse. The campaign went viral within hours. Donations came in from across the country, $5 here, $20 there, occasionally $100. But more powerful than the money were the comments. Hundreds of women sharing their own stories. "My parents did this to me too. I thought I was the only one. I've been the strong daughter my whole life and never had a name for what this was. Thank you for speaking up." By the end of the first week, the campaign had raised $12,000 from people I'd never met, women who saw themselves in my story and wanted to be part of breaking the silence around family exploitation. Then something unexpected happened. A woman named Catherine Brennan, owner of Brennan Industries, a successful manufacturing company in Greenfield, made a single donation of $10,000. She included a note, "I was also the strong daughter. I built my business with no family support after they told me women couldn't run companies. Your story is my story. Let's talk." Catherine called me directly the next day. She was 63, a widow, and had spent 40 years building a company that now employed over 200 people in the Greenfield area. She'd read Jennifer's article and seen herself in every paragraph. "I want to do more than just donate," she said. "I want to host an event. A community gathering at my company's event space where you can speak, where we can raise awareness about this issue, where other women can come and hear that they're not alone. And I'll personally match whatever additional funds come in from the community." And within 2 weeks, local businesses had contributed another $5,000 to the campaign. Catherine matched it. The total reached $27,000, nearly double what my parents had taken from me. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was the fact that a community of strangers had validated my experience in a way my own family never had. The Greenfield Community Center reached out in mid-May. They hosted a monthly women's empowerment night, and the director wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak at their June event about breaking generational patterns of family dysfunction. She explained that they typically had 50 to 75 attendees, mostly women from Greenfield and surrounding towns, and that my story had resonated deeply with their community. I hesitated. Speaking in Indianapolis was one thing, but speaking in Greenfield, in the town where my parents still lived, where they'd be unable to avoid hearing about it, where everyone would know exactly who I was talking about, even if I didn't use their names, that felt like a different level of exposure. I talked it over with Margaret during our weekly tea. She listened to my concerns, then set down her cup and looked at me with those wise, knowing eyes. "Sarah, do you know why I finally revealed myself to you after 20 years of staying anonymous?" she asked. "You said you were getting older and didn't want to die with the secret." "That's true, but it's not the whole truth." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I revealed myself because your story was already helping people, and I realized my part of your story could help even more people. Every woman who was secretly helped by someone. Every woman who wished someone had helped her. Every woman who wants to help someone else. They all need to hear that change is possible. That breaking cycles is possible." She squeezed my hand gently. "Your story will save someone else's life the way I tried to save yours all those years ago. Maybe it will save 12 lives. Maybe 100. But only if you're willing to tell it, even when it's uncomfortable, even in places where the people who hurt you might hear." I thought about that for a long time. I thought about the 12-year-old girl who wrote letters to her parents, begging to know why she wasn't enough. I thought about the 16-year-old studying under a streetlight because her family wouldn't let her waste electricity. I thought about all the other girls and women out there right now sitting in the dark thinking something must be wrong with them. "I'll do it," I said. I'd tell my story, in their town, on their turf, and they'd have to listen. The Greenfield Community Center was packed on a warm Tuesday evening in mid-June. I arrived 30 minutes early and found over 200 people already filling the seats standing along the walls, settling into folding chairs that staff kept bringing out to accommodate the overflow crowd. The event organizer looked thrilled and slightly panicked by the turnout. Margaret was there early too, seated in the front row wearing a jade-colored dress and that calm, encouraging expression that had become so familiar to me. When our eyes met, she nodded once, and I felt my nerves settle slightly. At 7 o'clock, Catherine Brennan introduced me with words that were generous and warm, and then I was walking to the small stage microphone in hand, looking out at a sea of faces I mostly didn't recognize. My hands were shaking. I gripped the microphone tighter and began. I told them my story. I started with being 9 years old and asking if I was adopted because I couldn't understand why I felt so different in my own family. I described working 2 jobs at 16 while my sister was encouraged to focus on being beautiful. I talked about 20 years of sending money home, about master's degrees, acknowledged with 4-minute phone calls, about being the one who gave everything and received nothing. I didn't use my parents' names. I didn't use Danielle's name. But in a town like Greenfield, everyone knew exactly who I was talking about. Midway through describing the Christmas dinner, the $15,000, the overheard conversation about scraps and side tables, I noticed movement in the back row. 3 people slipping in through the side door, trying to be inconspicuous but failing because every head in the room turned to look. My parents. And Danielle, visibly pregnant now, her hand on her stomach. Our eyes met across the crowded room. I saw my mother's face, pale and stricken. My father wouldn't look at me directly. Danielle's expression was unreadable, something between shame and curiosity. I could have stopped. I could have lost my train of thought or my courage. Instead, I kept speaking. I focused on my message rather than my audience. "If you're the daughter who eats last," I said, my voice stronger now, "the one who gets the leftovers, the one who's told she should just be grateful to be included, I need you to hear this. You deserve the whole meal. Not the scraps, the whole meal." I talked about breaking cycles, about finding people who see you, about learning that blood doesn't always mean family, and family doesn't always mean blood. I talked about Margaret, about the anonymous scholarship, about discovering that validation and love had been there all along, just not from the people I'd been desperately seeking it from. When I finished, the room was silent for 3 long seconds. Then someone in the middle stood up, then another person, Then the entire room was on their feet, applause filling the space so completely it felt like a physical force. The standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes. I stood there with tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from something I couldn't quite name. Recognition, validation, belonging. Afterward, dozens of women lined up to talk to me. They shared their own stories in whispered conversations and tearful confessions. My brother got everything while I worked. I've been supporting my parents for 30 years and they've never said thank you. I thought I was crazy for feeling this way. A local reporter was there taking notes, capturing the moment. During the commotion, I saw my parents slip out through the side door, heads down, moving quickly. They didn't wait to speak to me. They didn't approach. They just left, and I felt nothing watching them go. Not triumph, not vindication, just a quiet sense of completion. But Danielle stayed. She remained in her seat in the back row, watching as women shared their stories with me, watching as the crowd slowly thinned, watching as Margaret finally stood and gave me a hug that felt like benediction. After the crowd cleared, one person remained, my sister, and she was ready to tell me the truth. Danielle waited until the last person had left, and Margaret had stepped outside to give us privacy. Then she walked slowly up the center aisle, one hand supporting her very pregnant belly, the other clutching a tissue. When she reached me, she didn't try to hug me or apologize again. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face. "I heard every word you said," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "And I finally understood. Really understood. What they did to you. What I participated in. What I could become if I don't actively work to be different." I waited, letting her continue at her own pace. "I've moved out of their house. Marcus's parents have been helping us, actually being supportive in ways Mom and Dad never were. I'm in therapy twice a week, real therapy with someone who specializes in family trauma. And I'm learning things about myself that are hard to face, but I'm facing them because I have to. Because I'm going to be a mother in 3 weeks, and I refuse to become what they were." She looked down at her belly, then back at me. "I want to name her after Mrs. Chen. If you'll tell me her Chinese name. I want my daughter to be named after a woman who broke cycles, who helped someone without asking for anything in return, who believed in strength and education and women supporting each other. I want her to know her Aunt Sarah as an example of what real strength looks like, not the fake kind, where you pretend everything is fine while treating people terribly." And for the first time in our lives, my sister was seeing me as someone worth emulating rather than someone to use or dismiss. "Her name is Margaret Mei-Ling Chen," I said softly. "Mei-Ling means beautiful and delicate, but Margaret always said she was neither. She said she was strong and stubborn." Danielle smiled through her tears. "Mei-Ling, that's perfect. Mei-Ling Mitchell. A strong name for a girl who's going to know she's worth more than scraps." 3 weeks later, I used the $27,000 from the fundraiser to establish the Strong Daughters Fund as an official nonprofit organization. The mission was simple: provide micro-grants and support to young women trying to escape financially abusive family situations. Education grants, security deposits for their own apartments, therapy funding, career development support, whatever they needed to break free and build independent lives. Our first recipient was a 19-year-old named Emily from Greenfield, whose parents had been forcing her to work full-time at their family business since she was 16, controlling her entire paycheck and refusing to let her attend college. She'd reached out after reading Jennifer's article, asking if there was any way she could get help to escape. When I met with her and heard her story, I saw myself at 16 studying under that streetlight, desperate for a way out. We gave her a $5,000 grant for community college tuition and living expenses. 6 months later, she sent me a photo of herself on her first day of classes, with a note that said simply, "I'm free. Thank you for showing me this was possible." By December, the Strong Daughters Fund had helped 8 young women and had applications from dozens more. Margaret served on the board of directors. Catherine Brennan provided office space. The community that had validated my pain was now helping me transform it into something that could prevent other people's pain. When Christmas approached, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I sent out invitations for a small dinner at my apartment on Christmas Eve. Margaret, Danielle and Marcus, and 3-week-old baby Mei Ling, Rebecca and her husband, Catherine Brennan, the director from the community center, Uncle Bob and Aunt Linda. 10 people total, carefully chosen, each one someone who'd shown up for me when it mattered. I didn't invite my parents. I didn't send them a card or a message or any acknowledgement that the holiday existed. They were no longer part of my Christmas story, and I felt nothing but peace about that decision. On Christmas Eve, my apartment filled with the people I'd chosen as family. Margaret held baby Mei Ling with such tenderness that both Danielle and I cried watching her. Marcus told everyone about how Danielle had been showing up to therapy doing the hard work breaking patterns. Catherine shared stories about building her business after her family told her she'd fail. Rebecca made everyone laugh with stories about our college days. Aunt Linda admitted she'd known for years that my parents treated me unfairly, but hadn't known how to intervene. We ate a meal I'd spent 2 days preparing, nothing fancy or catered, just food made with care and love. Prime rib and roasted vegetables and homemade rolls and 3 different desserts because I couldn't decide which one to make. Everyone ate together at my dining table that barely fit us all, squeezed in close passing dishes, laughing, talking over each other. As we finished eating, I stood and raised my glass. Everyone quieted, looking at me with expectation. A year ago, I thought Christmas was about earning love from people who didn't know how to give it, I said. I thought if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, proved myself enough, I'd finally be worthy of being seen. But I was looking for validation in the wrong place. I looked around the table at each face. Margaret, who'd believed in me when I was 16. Danielle, who was fighting to become different. Marcus, who'd chosen truth over comfort. My friends who'd stayed. The community members who'd validated my experience. And baby Mei Ling sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, a symbol of cycles finally broken. You've all taught me that family isn't who shares your blood. It's who sees you, who shows up, who believes you're worth the whole meal, not just the scraps. So tonight, I want to propose a toast to the family who sees you, and to seeing yourself clearly enough to know what you deserve. Everyone raised their glasses. To seeing yourself, they echoed. As I sat back down and looked around my table, I realized I'd finally found what I'd been searching for my entire life. Not my parents' approval, not my sister's acknowledgement, but my own recognition of my own worth reflected back to me by people who'd chosen to love me freely. I didn't cancel Christmas. I reclaimed it. And this time, everyone got the full meal. And that's Sarah's story, a woman who spent 38 years being the good daughter, but finally chose to be herself. She didn't cancel Christmas, she reclaimed it. And this time everyone got the full meal, not the scraps. This story reminds us that real family isn't about who shares your blood. It's about who sees your worth, who shows up when it matters, and who believes you deserve the whole feast, not just the leftovers. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is set clear boundaries and build a new family from people who genuinely care about you. If you followed this emotional journey from beginning to end, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been in a similar situation? Do you think Sarah did the right thing, or would you have handled it differently? I genuinely want to hear your stories and perspectives. They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that family doesn't always mean love. I'm Sarah, and I spent 38 years being the invisible daughter, the one who gave everything and got nothing. The one who worked 2 jobs at 16 while my sister got her nails done. The one who sent money home for 20 years while my parents praised her for simply existing. Then I made the biggest mistake of my life. I offered to host Christmas. $15,000. An upscale hotel. 32 guests. I thought this would finally be my moment. The moment they'd see me, value me. Love me. 3 days before Christmas, I walked into my parents' house carrying homemade cookies. I heard laughter from the kitchen, then my mother's voice clear as crystal. Family eats first at the good table. She can have the leftovers, she won't mind. My sister laughed. She never complains. My father. She's just happy to be included. I stood there, frozen, my heart shattering, realizing they'd planned to seat me at a side table, to serve me scraps, at the dinner I was paying for. That night, I made a decision. And Christmas Eve, they got exactly what they deserved. An empty ballroom, no guests, and one photo of me celebrating elsewhere. 99 missed calls. A small town in chaos. But that was just the beginning. Because what came next, the stolen wedding money, the insurance policy that erased me, the sister's betrayal, and the stranger who'd been watching over me for 20 years, would change everything. This is the story of how I canceled Christmas, and found myself instead. Stay with me. You won't believe where this goes. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 38 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the daughter my parents could depend on even when they couldn't be bothered to remember my birthday. I work as an operations manager for a medical supply company in Indianapolis, a position I fought for and earned through sheer determination because no one in my family ever believed I needed more than a high school diploma. Some people say they were born to be caregivers. I don't think I was born to it. I think I was trained into it the way you train a dog to fetch, throw the stick enough times, and eventually they stop questioning why they're running. I grew up in Greenfield, Indiana, one of those small Midwestern towns where everyone knows your business and nobody forgets your mistakes. My childhood home was a modest ranch house on Maple Street with a chain-link fence and a lawn my father never quite managed to keep green. Dad worked at the GM plant before it closed. Mom cleaned houses for the wealthier families on the north side of town. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. There was always this underlying anxiety about money, about keeping up appearances, about making sure the neighbors didn't think we were struggling. I was 16 when I got my first real job washing dishes at the local diner on weeknight evenings. Within a month, I'd picked up weekend shifts at the grocery store, too. My parents said it would build character and teach me the value of $1. What it actually taught me was that my paychecks were expected contributions to the household fund, while my younger sister Danielle's babysitting money was hers to spend on nail polish and movie tickets with friends. Danielle was 14 then, and already she was the pretty one, the charming one, the daughter our mother fussed over. Mom would spend an hour helping her pick out the perfect outfit for school dances, while I ironed my own work uniforms in the basement. Dad would beam with pride when Danielle brought home a B- report card, but my straight A's earned nothing more than a distracted, "That's nice, honey," muttered over the evening news. I told myself it didn't matter. I convinced myself I was just more independent, more mature, more capable. I told myself that parents show love in different ways, and maybe their way of loving me was trusting me to handle things on my own. I kept telling myself that lie all through high school, even as I watched my paychecks disappear into household expenses, while Danielle's prom dress cost more than I earned in a month. After high school, I went to community college while working full-time at a call center. I paid every penny of my tuition myself because my parents said they couldn't afford to help me. Though somehow they could afford to support Danielle in what they called her journey to find a good husband. When I transferred to a 4-year university, I took out loans and worked nights and weekends. When I graduated with my bachelor's degree, my mother called to say, "Congratulations," and then immediately asked if I could send some money because the water heater had broken. I moved to Indianapolis for my career, but I never really left Greenfield. Not financially, anyway. Every month for the past 20 years, I've sent money home. $300 here, $500 there. When Dad's truck needed a new transmission, I paid for it. When Mom needed dental work, I covered it. When Danielle wanted to take a $2,000 photography course that would help her find her passion, I wired the money without question. I showed up for every family emergency, too. When Dad had his heart scare 5 years ago, I took a week off work and drove the 45 minutes each way to sit in hospital waiting rooms, bringing Mom coffee and organizing his medications. Danielle visited once, took a selfie with Dad for Instagram, and left after 20 minutes because hospitals made her anxious. At family gatherings. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, birthdays. I became part of the furniture. I was always there, always bringing the expensive wine or the fancy dessert from the bakery everyone loved. I'd sit at the table and watch conversations flow around me like water around a stone. Dad and Danielle would discuss her latest artistic endeavor. Mom would show everyone photos from Danielle's most recent vacation. Cousins would ask Danielle about her life, her boyfriend, her plans. When anyone remembered I was there, they'd ask me to help in the kitchen or refill someone's drink. Once my aunt asked what I did for a living. Before I could answer, Mom jumped in with, "Oh, Sarah's got some office job," and immediately steered the conversation back to Danielle's upcoming gallery showing of her smartphone photography. I would drive home after these gatherings feeling hollow, but I'd tell myself I was being too sensitive. This was just how our family worked. Some people are the stars of the show, and some people work backstage. I was backstage crew. That was my role. And if I just kept showing up, kept giving, kept being dependable and useful and uncomplaining, eventually they'd notice. Eventually, they'd see me. Eventually, I'd earn my place in the spotlight too. I built my entire identity around being the good daughter, the one who never caused problems, the sister who never complained, the family member who could always be counted on to show up with her checkbook open and her needs tucked quietly away where they wouldn't inconvenience anyone. For 22 years, I believed this was what love looked like. I believed that sacrifice and being valued were the same thing. I believed that if I just gave enough, did enough, proved myself enough, then one day I would finally be enough. But I was wrong. Love isn't supposed to leave you invisible. My sister Danielle is 32 years old and she has never held a steady job in her entire adult life. She's what people in our town politely call a free spirit, which is a gentler way of saying she floats from one half-hearted venture to another while other people pay her bills. Over the years, she's tried photography, jewelry making, lifestyle blogging, and most recently something she calls wellness consulting, which, as far as I can tell, involves posting inspirational quotes on Instagram and occasionally selling essential oils to her friends. None of this matters to my parents. To them, Danielle is perfect simply by existing. She got our mother's delicate bone structure and our grandmother's thick auburn hair that catches the light like copper. She has this way of tilting her head when she talks that makes people feel like they're the only person in the room. She laughs easily, touches people's arms when she speaks, remembers small details about conversations from months ago. She's charming in that effortless way some people are the kind of charm that opens doors and loosens wallets and makes everyone want to help her succeed at whatever she's currently attempting. I've watched my parents' faces light up when she walks into a room for 32 years. It never stops hurting. When Danielle dropped out of community college after 3 semesters because she needed to find herself, my parents threw her a celebration party anyway. They invited 20 people to the house, ordered sandwich platters, and a sheet cake that read, "Follow your dreams, Danielle," in purple frosting. My mother gave a tearful speech about how proud she was that Danielle had the courage to forge her own path instead of following convention. I stood in the corner of our living room, holding a paper plate of potato salad, watching everyone toast my sister's bravery in quitting. 2 years later, when I earned my master's degree in business administration while working full-time and managing a team of 8 people, my mother called me on graduation day. The conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes. She said, "Congratulations," asked if the ceremony had been nice, mentioned that Danielle had just started dating someone new who seemed very promising, and then asked if I could send a little extra money that month because they were behind on the electric bill. I told her I'd wire $500. She thanked me and hung up. There was no party, no cake, no speech about being proud. This past October, Danielle got engaged to Marcus, her boyfriend of 2 years. He's a decent enough man who works in IT and seems genuinely kind, though I've only met him 3 times at family gatherings, where he mostly looked uncomfortable and said little. The proposal happened at sunset on a beach in Florida during a vacation my parents had helped fund, because Danielle told them she desperately needed to recharge her creative energy after what she described as an exhausting summer. My mother called me that evening, sobbing with joy so intense she could barely form coherent sentences. Between gasps, she managed to describe how Marcus had gotten down on one knee in the sand with a vintage ring, how Danielle had looked like a princess in her white sundress, how perfect and romantic the whole moment had been. She FaceTimed me from their house where Danielle was showing off the ring to relatives who'd rushed over her hand extended toward the camera, while everyone made the appropriate sounds of admiration. I said all the right things. I congratulated her. I told her the ring was beautiful. I asked when they were thinking about the wedding. That's when I heard the shift in my mother's voice, that slight tightening that meant stress was creeping in beneath the excitement. "Oh, we haven't gotten that far in the planning yet," she said, but there was something else in her tone. "These weddings cost so much these days. But we'll figure something out. This is Danielle's special day and it needs to be perfect." Over the following weeks, wedding planning consumed every conversation I had with my mother. She called me almost daily with updates I hadn't asked for and didn't particularly need. They'd found a venue, but the deposit was steep. Danielle wanted a destination wedding, or maybe a garden ceremony, or perhaps a formal ballroom reception. She kept changing her mind. The dress shopping alone would require multiple trips to bridal boutiques in Indianapolis. Did I know how much alterations cost these days? Did I understand how expensive flowers were? I listened to her anxiety spiral about money while she simultaneously described $1,000 floral arrangements and custom invitations that cost $5 each. I kept waiting for her to ask me directly for help. That's usually how it worked in our family. They'd hint and worry and stress out loud until I offered to step in with my checkbook. But this time, the direct ask never came. My mother just sounded increasingly frantic every time we spoke, dropping comments about wedding expenses and everything costs so much more than we imagined, without actually requesting assistance. During one particularly long phone call in late October, my mother mentioned they were looking at Valentine's Day for the wedding date. "I know it's rushed only a few months away, but Danielle has her heart set on a winter wedding, and Valentine's Day is just so romantic, don't you think?" Her voice was stretched thin with tension. "We're trying to make it work within our budget, but it's challenging." Meanwhile, every accomplishment I'd achieved that year went virtually unnoticed. I'd been promoted to senior operations manager in August, a position that came with a substantial raise and leadership responsibilities I'd worked toward for 5 years. When I called my parents to share the news, my father said, "That's great, honey," in the exact same tone he used when I told him I'd gotten my oil changed. My mother said, "Oh, how wonderful," and then immediately launched into a story about a watercolor painting Danielle had just completed for a friend's birthday. When Danielle posted a photograph of herself holding a coffee cup on Instagram and it received 200 likes, my mother printed it out and had it framed. It hangs in their living room to this day. My master's degree diploma, as far as I know, is in a box somewhere in their attic. Last year, when Danielle decided she needed her own apartment because living with roommates was stifling her creative process, my parents gave her $3,000 for the security deposit and first month's rent. When I was 32, I'd been living in a studio apartment I could barely afford, eating ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week and still sending money home for their mortgage payment. The pattern was so obvious, so glaring, that I'd run out of ways to explain it to myself. But I kept trying anyway, kept making excuses, kept telling myself that maybe they just worried about Danielle more because she was less capable, or maybe they knew I was strong enough not to need constant validation. Maybe this was just their way of balancing things out. Watching the wedding obsession consume them through October and November, something began shifting inside me. A tiny crack appeared in the foundation of justifications I'd spent decades building. As Thanksgiving approached and my mother's stress about wedding costs reached a fever pitch, I found myself thinking about all those years of being second place, of being the dependable one who never got celebrated, of being invisible in my own family. I decided that this Christmas would be different. This year I would do something so generous, so undeniably loving, that they'd have no choice but to finally see me. I'd give them a holiday celebration they would never forget, something that would prove once and for all how much I cared, how much I'd always cared, how much I deserved to be valued in return. I was about to give them a Christmas they'd never forget. I just didn't know I'd regret it. The idea came to me in early December while I was reviewing my annual bonus statement at work. I'd had an exceptional year exceeding every performance metric my company had set, and the bonus reflected that success. $15,000. I stared at that number on my computer screen and felt something click into place. This was it. This was how I'd finally break through the invisible wall that had always stood between me and my family's genuine affection. I would host Christmas dinner. Not just any dinner, but an event they'd remember for the rest of their lives. I'd rent an upscale venue with white tablecloths and crystal stemware. I'd hire professional caterers to serve courses with names I'd have to practice pronouncing. I'd invite everyone, aunts, uncles, cousins, the family friends my parents always wanted to impress but could never afford to entertain properly. 32 people in total. It would be elegant and warm and perfect. The kind of Christmas celebration that becomes part of family lore, the story people tell for decades about that one magical holiday. More importantly, it would be undeniable proof. Proof that I loved them, proof that I valued family, proof that I was worth loving back. I called my mother on a Tuesday evening, my hands actually trembling as I dialed her number. When she answered, I could hear the television playing in the background and my father asking who was calling. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told her I wanted to give the family a gift this year, something meaningful. I wanted to host Christmas dinner at the Riverside Inn, the nicest hotel in Greenfield, the one with the elegant ballroom that overlooked the water. I would cover everything, the venue rental, the catering, the decorations, the whole event. All they had to do was show up and enjoy themselves. The silence on the other end lasted 3 heartbeats. Then my mother made a sound I'd never heard from her before, a choked gasp that transformed into a sob. "Sarah," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Sarah, are you serious? Do you really mean it?" I told her I'd never been more serious about anything in my life. I wanted to do this for them, for all of us. I wanted to give us the Christmas we deserved, the kind of celebration that would bring our family closer together. My father got on the phone then. His voice was gruff, but I could hear genuine emotion underneath it. "That's real generous of you, kiddo," he said. "Real generous." Then my mother was back on the line, crying those happy tears, thanking me over and over, saying she couldn't believe it, saying this was the most wonderful thing anyone had ever done for the family. I heard Danielle squeal in the background, heard her say, "Oh my God, Sarah, this is amazing." It was possibly the most enthusiastic response I'd ever gotten from her about anything I'd done. We talked for nearly an hour, the longest family phone call I could remember. That wasn't about someone being in the hospital. My mother kept asking if I was absolutely sure if I could really afford it, but the way she asked made it clear she was already planning in her head, already imagining how it would look, what she would wear, who she would tell first about this extravagant gesture her successful daughter was making. I assured her repeatedly that I could afford it. I told her to consider it my Christmas gift to the entire family, my way of saying thank you for being my people. The words felt true when I said them. I meant them with every fiber of my being. The next morning, I went to my bank and initiated a wire transfer of $15,000 to my parents' joint checking account. In the memo line, I typed for our family Christmas celebration. I watched the transaction process on the screen, watched my account balance drop by that significant amount, and felt nothing but warmth spreading through my chest. This wasn't just money. This was hope. This was the beginning of everything changing between us. I spent my lunch breaks for the next week researching menu options and creating Pinterest boards for decoration ideas. I made lists of wines that would pair well with different courses. I imagined my mother and me sitting at her kitchen table together, planning every detail, finally working on something as a team, instead of me always being on the outside looking in. But when I called to discuss the planning, my mother's responses started getting shorter, vaguer. When I suggested specific entree choices, she'd say, "Whatever you think is best, honey." When I asked about her preference for centerpieces, she responded with, "You have such good taste, just surprise us." When I tried to nail down details about timing and guest confirmations, she told me not to worry about it. They would handle everything I'd done more than enough already by providing the funding. At first, I felt touched by this. I thought perhaps they were planning something special for me, some kind of surprise presentation or tribute during the dinner, where they'd finally acknowledge everything I'd done for them over the years. The thought made me giddy with anticipation. I imagined my father standing up to make a toast in front of everyone, my mother's proud smile, Danielle hugging me and thanking me for being such an incredible sister. I kept sending ideas anyway, kept trying to stay involved, but my texts would go unanswered for days at a time. My phone calls would be returned with brief voicemails saying they were terribly busy, but everything was coming together beautifully. My mother assured me repeatedly that I didn't need to worry about a single thing. They had it all completely under control. I should just relax and be a guest at my own party. This was my gift to them, she reminded me, so I deserved to simply show up on Christmas Eve and enjoy myself. I chose to believe the best interpretation. I chose to trust them. I chose to see their distance as loving preparation, rather than what it actually was. I thought I was investing in family. I didn't know I was paying for my own humiliation. By mid-December, I'd called my mother 11 times. 7 of those calls went straight to voicemail. The 4 she actually answered were brief and distracted, as if I'd caught her in the middle of something important she couldn't wait to get back to. She'd pick up sounding slightly breathless and tell me she was terribly busy but wanted to check in quickly. When I'd try to discuss specific details about the dinner, had she confirmed the final head count? Did she have preferences for the wine selection? Should we coordinate our outfits? She'd make a non-committal humming sound and say, "We've got it all handled, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." Don't worry about it. That phrase became a wall I kept running into over and over. I texted her a link to an article about beautiful winter table settings, thinking we could coordinate colors and create something truly special together. Her response came 6 hours later. Nice. Just that one word. I sent Danielle 3 different options for placecard designs, excited to get her artistic input, since she was always talking about her eye for aesthetics. She replied 2 days later with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. When I called my father to ask whether he thought we should have a champagne toast before dinner or save it for dessert, he said, "Whatever your mother decides is fine with me," and then told me he had to go help her with something and hung up. The exclusion felt so deliberate, so systematic, that I started keeping notes in my phone without really understanding why. December 12th. Called Mom at 2 p.m. voicemail. Texted at 4 p.m. about dietary restrictions for guests. No response. December 14th. Called again during lunch. She answered but said she was at the store and would call back later. She never did. December 16th. Sent detailed email with 3 different catering menu options, asked her to review by end of week. She responded 4 days later with, "Looks great, you decide." The rational part of my brain recognized these as warning signs, but I'd spent 38 years learning to explain away my family's coldness, to find the generous interpretation in their thoughtlessness, to convince myself that their dismissiveness was actually them trusting my judgment. That skill didn't abandon me now. If anything, I doubled down on it, working harder to make their behavior make sense. I decided to drive to Greenfield on a Saturday 2 weeks before Christmas, thinking I could help with preparations in person. Surely, if I just showed up, we could sit at their kitchen table together and finalize everything like a real family, planning a real celebration. I'd bring coffee and those almond croissants my mother loved from the bakery near my office. We'd make a whole day of it. I called ahead to let them know I was coming. My mother's voice went tight with what sounded like panic. "Oh, today, Sarah, honey, we're actually swamped today. The house is a complete disaster. We're really not ready for company right now." I told her I didn't care about the house being messy, that I just wanted to help with the planning. There was a pause, then a muffled sound like she'd covered the phone to talk to someone else. When she came back on the line, her voice was strained. "Let's plan for another time, okay? Maybe next week. We'll let you know when works better." Next week came and the same thing happened. And the week after that. Every single attempt I made to physically be there to participate in planning the event I was entirely funding was met with vague excuses about bad timing or being too busy or not wanting me to waste my time on the drive. The one time I did manage to show up unannounced on a Wednesday evening after work, the atmosphere in their house was so strange, I almost turned around and left immediately. My mother answered the door looking genuinely surprised and not at all pleased to see me. She let me in but seemed nervous. Kept glancing toward the kitchen where I could hear my father and Danielle talking in voices just low enough that I couldn't make out the words. When I walked toward the kitchen to say hello, their conversation stopped abruptly like someone had hit a mute button. My father looked up from his laptop and closed it so quickly he nearly caught his fingers in it. Danielle smiled at me, but it was her public smile, the one she used with acquaintances and strangers, not the genuine warmth she showed people she was comfortable with. I asked what they were working on. My father said, "Just some stuff," which told me absolutely nothing. I asked if they were planning details for the Christmas dinner. My mother practically jumped in to say, "Nothing you need to concern yourself with. We told you we have everything under control." I stood there in the kitchen where I'd washed dishes as a teenager while they praised Danielle for simply setting the table, and I felt like an intruder, like I'd walked in on a meeting I wasn't supposed to know about. The air felt thick with secrets I couldn't name. I stayed for 20 awkward minutes. They asked superficial questions about my commute and my job, the kind of questions you ask acquaintances you're trying to be polite to, not questions you ask your daughter. When I finally said I should probably head home, my mother walked me to the door with visible relief written across her face. She hugged me, told me how grateful they were for my incredible generosity, and said they'd see me Christmas Eve. The door closed behind me before I'd even reached my car. Driving back to Indianapolis that night, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, I felt something cold and dark settle in the pit of my stomach. Something was wrong. I knew it the way you know when you're coming down with the flu, that bone-deep certainty that something in your system isn't functioning the way it should even before all the symptoms appear. But I talked myself out of it during that entire 45-minute drive. I constructed elaborate explanations for their behavior. They were planning a surprise for me, that had to be it. They were being secretive because they wanted Christmas Eve to be special, to finally acknowledge everything I'd done for them over all these years. Maybe they'd arranged for someone to give a speech about me. Maybe they'd compiled a video with messages from family members expressing their appreciation. Maybe they'd bought me something truly meaningful, something that showed they'd been paying attention all along to who I was and what mattered to me. The alternative explanation, the true one, was too painful to even consider. So I didn't consider it. I pushed it down into that deep place where I'd been pushing uncomfortable truths about my family for 38 years. I chose hope over instinct. I chose the story that allowed me to keep believing, to keep waiting, to keep thinking that this time would be different. I was right. Christmas would make everything clear, just not in the way I'd hoped. December 22nd fell on a Friday that year. I'd taken the afternoon off work to bake my grandmother's sugar cookies, the ones with almond extract that my mother had always claimed were her absolute favorites. It was a tradition I'd maintained even after my grandmother passed away, showing up before Christmas with tins of cookies tied with red ribbon. I'd made 3 dozen that afternoon, spending hours in my kitchen rolling out dough and cutting shapes, stars and bells and Christmas trees, telling myself this was one more piece of the beautiful holiday we were going to share together. I loaded the cookies into my car along with a poinsettia plant I'd picked up from the nursery and headed to Greenfield in the late afternoon. The sun was already low in the December sky, casting everything in that particular golden light that makes even ordinary neighborhoods look like they belong on Christmas cards. I felt good driving through town, waving at neighbors I recognized, imagining how magical Christmas Eve was going to be in just 2 more days. I still had my key to my parents' house, the same brass key I'd carried since high school. I'd used it hundreds of times over the years, letting myself in to help with emergencies, or drop off groceries, or check on things when they traveled. It had never occurred to me to knock. This was my family home. I belonged here. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open quietly, not wanting to startle anyone, carefully balancing the cookie tin and the poinsettia. The house smelled like coffee and something baking cinnamon, maybe. The television wasn't on. I could hear voices coming from the kitchen, laughter, the comfortable sound of family conversation. I opened my mouth to call out hello to announce my arrival the way I always did. Then I heard my mother's voice, clear and bright with amusement, drifting down the hallway from the kitchen. "Well, family eats first at the good table. She can have whatever's left over. She won't mind." I stopped moving. The cookie tin suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Danielle's laugh rang out, that musical sound she'd perfected over the years, the one that made everyone around her want to laugh along. "Mom, that's terrible." But her voice was delighted, conspiratorial, not shocked at all. "But yeah, you're right. She never complains about anything." My father's deeper voice joined in, and I could hear the smile in it, the casual certainty. "She's just happy to be included. Always has been. That's Sarah." More laughter. The sound of a chair scraping against the kitchen floor. My mother again, her tone shifting to practical planning mode, the voice she used when organizing tasks. "So we'll have the main table here by the window where everyone can see us. The four of us at the head table, obviously. Your father and me, you and Marcus. That's what we're paying for, after all, to be seen as the family hosting this elegant dinner. Paying for. With my $15,000. For an elegant dinner where I would be eating scraps." I couldn't move. I stood frozen in that hallway, half hidden behind the coat closet, the poinsettia plant beginning to tilt in my grip because I'd forgotten I was holding it. Danielle spoke up, her voice eager. "What about the centerpiece? Should we have something tall and dramatic on our table so everyone knows immediately that it's the important one?" "Perfect idea," my father said, and I could hear papers rustling, probably seating charts. "And we'll put Sarah over with Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob at the side table near the kitchen doors. They won't mind being a little out of the way." My mother made a sound of agreement. "That table gets served last anyway, once all the main guests have been taken care of. By then most of the premium cuts will already be gone, but there'll still be plenty of food. And honestly, Sarah probably won't even notice. She'll likely be up helping the caterers if they need anything. You know how she is about being useful." "Always helpful," Danielle said, and I genuinely couldn't tell if she was being sincere or mocking. Maybe she didn't know either. They laughed again. It wasn't cruel laughter, not exactly. It was comfortable, casual, the kind of laughter that comes from people who are so absolutely certain of their rightness that questioning it never even crosses their minds. They were talking about me the way you might discuss furniture placement or what to do with a family pet you knew would be content with whatever space you gave it. My mother continued, her voice warm with satisfaction and anticipation. "The whole evening is going to be absolutely perfect. Everyone will be so impressed with us. The Morgans will finally see that we can host something truly elegant. And Danielle, sweetheart, everyone is going to see how beautiful you look. This will be wonderful practice for your wedding reception in February." The wedding, my $15,000. The money I'd sent with the memo for our family Christmas celebration. Money they'd taken and immediately used for something else entirely, then planned a dinner where I'd be relegated to the cheap seats eating leftovers after the real family had finished. I felt something crack inside my chest, a physical sensation like ice breaking under pressure. I stepped backward slowly, carefully, my body operating on autopilot while my mind tried desperately to process what I'd just heard. I made it to the front door without making a sound. My hands were shaking as I set the tin of cookies down on the porch bench, next to the dormant geranium pot my mother kept meaning to bring inside for the winter. I placed the poinsettia beside it. I didn't leave a note. I couldn't have written one even if I'd wanted to. My hands were trembling too badly, and my mind had gone completely blank. The drive back to Indianapolis happened in a blur of highway lights and darkness. I don't remember getting on the interstate. I don't remember most of the turns or stops. I must have obeyed traffic signals and used my turn signal and followed all the rules of the road, but my conscious mind was somewhere else entirely, replaying that conversation on an endless loop. She can have whatever's left over. She won't mind. She's just happy to be included. Always has been. When I finally pulled into my apartment parking lot, it was fully dark outside. I sat in my car with the engine off my hands, still gripping the steering wheel, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, thanking me for the sweet surprise of the cookies she must have found on the porch. The message included a heart emoji. That night I didn't cry. I planned. Planning requires information. I sat on my couch that night with my laptop open and a cup of tea growing cold on the coffee table, my mind racing through possibilities and explanations. Around 1 a.m, I logged into my bank account, not entirely sure what I was looking for, but needing to see something concrete, something that would help me make sense of the chaos swirling in my head. The wire transfer from early December was right there in my transaction history. $15,000 sent to my parents' joint checking account. I'd looked at this transaction dozens of times since making it, each time feeling a warm glow of generosity and purpose. Now I stared at it and felt only a cold, spreading numbness. There was a reference number attached to the transfer, a long string of digits I'd never paid attention to before. At 2 a.m, with my apartment silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of someone's television through the walls, I called my bank's 24-hour customer service line. The representative who answered sounded tired, but remained professional. I explained that I'd sent a wire transfer several weeks ago and needed to verify some information about where the funds had ultimately gone. She asked me standard security questions, verified my identity, pulled up the transaction on her system. Then she asked what specifically I needed to know. I asked if there was any way to see what had happened to the money after it landed in my parents' account. She put me on hold. Elevator music played for 3 long minutes. When she came back, her voice had taken on that carefully neutral tone customer service representatives use when they're about to deliver news you won't like. The funds had remained in my parents' account for approximately 4 hours before being transferred in full to another account. She gave me the last 4 digits of the receiving account and asked if I wanted her to verify the account holder's name. My throat felt tight. I said yes. The account belonged to Danielle Marie Mitchell, my sister. I thanked the representative and ended the call. I sat there holding my phone, staring at my dark television screen, watching my own reflection in the black glass. The woman looking back at me seemed like someone I should recognize, but didn't quite know anymore. Sleep wasn't going to happen. At 6 a.m, after spending 4 hours sitting in the darkness, turning this information over and over in my mind like a stone I was examining for cracks, I called the Riverside Inn. I knew they wouldn't be open yet for regular business, but I left a voicemail with the events coordinator asking her to call me back as soon as possible regarding a reservation for Christmas Eve under the Mitchell family name. She returned my call at 9:15. Her voice was cheerful and helpful, exactly the kind of professional warmth you'd expect from someone who organized elegant events for a living. She looked up Christmas Eve in their reservation system. There was no booking under Mitchell. No reservation under my name either. She asked if perhaps I was thinking of a different date, or if the reservation might be under another family member's name. I told her I must have been confused and thanked her for checking. My hands were shaking as I set down the phone. I had a friend from college, Rebecca, who'd gone into event planning and worked with most of the upscale venues within 50 miles of both Indianapolis and Greenfield. We'd stayed in touch over the years, meeting occasionally for lunch when our schedules aligned. I sent her a text, keeping my tone casual, asking if she knew anything about a wedding venue booking for a Danielle Mitchell probably scheduled for sometime in February, possibly Valentine's Day. She responded within the hour. She hadn't handled the booking personally, but her colleague at Premier Events had recently coordinated a Valentine's Day wedding deposit for a Danielle Mitchell at the Grand Conservatory, one of those stunning glass-walled garden venues that cost a fortune to rent. The deposit had been exactly $15,000. Her colleague had mentioned it specifically because it was unusual to receive such a large deposit in cash so close to the actual wedding date. Most couples paid in installments over many months. I read Rebecca's text 3 times, then set my phone down very carefully on my kitchen counter, as if it might shatter if I moved too quickly. The pieces assembled themselves with ugly, perfect clarity. My mother's increasingly frantic comments about wedding expenses throughout October and November hadn't been idle worrying or typical mother-of-the-bride stress. They'd been dealing with a genuine financial crisis. When I'd called in early December offering to fund an elaborate Christmas celebration, I'd handed them the solution to their problem wrapped in ribbon and innocent good intentions. They'd taken my money, my gesture of love and desperate hope for connection, and funneled every penny directly into Danielle's wedding fund. The Christmas dinner I believed I was hosting didn't exist. There was no reservation. There had never been a reservation. My mother's tears when I'd made my offer hadn't been about Christmas at all. They'd been tears of relief. Gratitude, perhaps, but not for the reasons I'd imagined. I'd solved their wedding financial crisis without even knowing there was one, and the seating arrangement they'd been discussing so casually, the main table and the side table, and who would be served first and who would get the scraps, all of that was for a dinner that was never going to happen. Or perhaps it was practice for the wedding, where no doubt I'd be seated somewhere in the back, far from the family table, far from anywhere that mattered. I thought about my mother's voice, so casual and certain, saying she won't mind. I thought about 38 years of not minding, of accepting less, of convincing myself that scraps were sufficient if they came from people you loved. They didn't steal Christmas, they sold it, and I was going to buy it back. The first thing I did was go through my email. Every single message I'd sent and received about Christmas dinner was still there. A complete digital paper trail that told a very specific story. I'd been the one to initially contact the Riverside Inn back in early December, inquiring about their ballroom availability for Christmas Eve. I'd been the one to discuss menu options with their catering coordinator. I'd been the one to provide my credit card information for the initial deposit, even though the bulk of the $15,000 had gone to my parents' account for them to supposedly handle arrangements. But here was the critical detail I'd forgotten. In my eagerness to be generous, the reservation itself was in my name. Sarah Mitchell. Not my parents, not the Mitchell family. Me. The Riverside Inn had my contact information, my email address, my phone number listed as the primary client. As far as they were concerned, I was the one hosting this event. My parents had no legal standing with the venue because they'd never actually made a reservation. They couldn't have. They'd taken my money and spent it on something else entirely. I had receipts. I had email confirmations. I had text message threads with the events coordinator discussing table arrangements and dietary restrictions. Everything was documented because I was organized and thorough, because that's who I'd always been, the dependable one who kept records and followed through and made sure nothing fell through the cracks. For once in my life, being that person was going to work entirely in my favor. I called the Riverside Inn back at 9:30. This time, I asked to speak with the manager, not just the events coordinator. When she came on the line, I explained that there had been a significant family miscommunication about the Christmas Eve event. I was still planning to host dinner, I told her, but I needed to make an important change to the arrangements. Instead of the large ballroom for 32 people, I wanted to book their smaller private dining room, the intimate Canterbury room that seated about 15 guests. Could she accommodate that change? She put me on hold to check availability. When she returned, she confirmed that yes, the Canterbury room was available for Christmas Eve, same time slot, just a different space. The deposit I'd already paid would more than cover the smaller venue. In fact, she said she'd be issuing me a refund of several $1,000s given the reduced space and guest count. Did I want to proceed with the modification? I told her absolutely. I gave her explicit instructions that this change was to remain confidential, that she should not communicate with anyone else in my family about it under any circumstances, and that all future correspondence should come exclusively to me. She assured me that wouldn't be a problem. As far as the Riverside Inn's records showed, I was the only client on file anyway. There was no one else for them to contact. Then came the delicate part. I needed to reach the extended family and friends who'd been invited to the original dinner, the 32 people my parents believed would be witnesses to their grand celebration. I started with my father's sister, Aunt Linda, who'd apparently been destined for the side table with me. I called her directly and explained carefully that there had been a change of plans. I was still hosting Christmas dinner, but at a different, smaller venue. I gave her the new location details and asked her to keep this information completely confidential until Christmas Eve. I told her I'd explain everything when we gathered, but for now, I needed her discretion. There was a long, significant pause on her end of the line. Then she said quietly, "Does this have something to do with how they've been treating you all these years?" Her voice was gentle but knowing. It turned out I hadn't been quite as invisible as I'd believed, at least not to everyone. I made similar calls and sent similar emails throughout that Saturday. My college friends who'd been on the guest list, my coworkers from my previous job who'd stayed in touch over the years, my favorite cousin who lived 2 towns over, Uncle Bob and his wife, the Hendersons from church. One by one, I contacted each person individually, explained there was a venue change, gave them the new location, and asked them to keep it confidential. Not a single person questioned my request. Several of them said things like, "Good for you," or "It's about time," in ways that made me realize my family's treatment of me had been far more transparent than I'd ever understood. By Sunday evening, I had confirmations from 14 people who would attend my relocated Christmas Eve dinner. 14 people who mattered, who'd actually noticed me over the years, who responded to my invitation with genuine warmth, rather than obligatory politeness. Then I did the hardest thing of all. I did nothing. I said absolutely nothing to my parents. Nothing to Danielle. When my mother called on Monday asking if I'd be arriving early on Christmas Eve to help set things up, I said of course whatever she needed I'd be happy to help. When Danielle texted asking what I was planning to wear so we could coordinate our outfits, I sent her a description of a dress I owned but had zero intention of wearing. When my father left me a voicemail saying he was really looking forward to the big celebration, I texted back a simple smiley face and, "Me too, Dad." I watched them prepare from a careful distance through the filtered lens of social media and brief superficial phone calls. My mother posted on Facebook about hosting an elegant Christmas celebration for the family. Danielle shared photos of the new outfit she'd purchased for the occasion, something expensive and beautiful that had probably been bought with money that originated from me. They were excited. They were planning. They believed everything was proceeding exactly according to their design. They had absolutely no idea that on Christmas Eve, they would arrive at the Riverside Inn to find an empty ballroom. No guests, no me, no dinner service, just expensive holiday decorations they couldn't afford and a confused venue staff who would have no record whatsoever of any reservation under their names. Meanwhile, I'd be 15 minutes away in the Canterbury room surrounded by people who actually saw me finally celebrating Christmas on my own terms, with people who'd chosen to show up for me. Let's see how they enjoy Christmas dinner without guests or their generous benefactor. The week before Christmas moved in a strange duality of time, crawling slowly when I was alone with my thoughts racing forward whenever I interacted with my family. Every conversation felt like a performance. I was giving a role I'd played my entire life, but now, with complete awareness of the script and the ending, nobody else could see coming. My mother called me Tuesday morning, her voice bright with that particular kind of stress-fueled energy that comes from planning something important. I could hear kitchen sounds in the background, cabinet doors opening and closing, the clatter of dishes being moved around. "Sarah, honey, I'm just confirming some final details with the caterer," she said, which was interesting given that no caterer had ever actually spoken to her. "We're all set for 32 guests, correct, and you're still planning to arrive around 4 to help us get everything ready." I told her yes, 32 sounded perfect, and absolutely, I'd be there at 4 to help however she needed. The lies slid out easily now, smooth and practiced. I heard my father's voice in the background saying something about table arrangements. My mother covered the phone imperfectly, and I caught fragments of their exchange. The round table by the windows, and "make sure we have the good linens," and "family positioned at the center where everyone can see us." When she came back on the line, she was slightly breathless with excitement. "This is going to be so special, Sarah. Everyone is going to be absolutely impressed. Your father's been practicing a toast he wants to give." She paused, and for just a moment I wondered if she might actually acknowledge what I'd done who'd made this possible. Instead, she said, "Make sure you wear something nice. Okay, not too flashy, though. We want Danielle to shine since this is sort of a pre-wedding celebration for her too, but presentable. I assured her I'd dress appropriately and ended the call. I sat in my office at work staring at my computer screen, marveling at how effortless it had become to maintain the fiction when everyone involved was so deeply invested in believing it. Wednesday brought an avalanche of activity on Danielle's social media. She posted a photo of herself in a deep green velvet dress, twirling in my parents' living room with the Christmas tree blurred artfully in the background. The caption read, "Getting ready for the amazing Christmas celebration my family is throwing tomorrow night. Feeling so blessed and grateful for this special evening together." Within an hour, the post had 47 likes. Friends flooded the comments with heart emojis and questions. "Can I come?" one person wrote. "Is this the fancy dinner your mom was telling everyone about?" asked another. Danielle responded to each comment with practiced grace. "Close family only this year, but thank you so much. And it's an intimate gathering, just our nearest and dearest. And Mom and Dad wanted to keep it small and meaningful." Not once in any response did she mention my name. Not once did she acknowledge that this celebration she was so excited about existed entirely because of money I'd provided. She was the star of a show funded by someone she'd rendered completely invisible in the narrative. Thursday morning, she posted again, this time a photo of the green velvet dress laid out on her bed, next to silver heels and diamond earrings she'd borrowed from our mother. "Tonight is going to be magical," the caption declared simply. I took a screenshot, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Some instinct to document this moment before everything changed. My own preparations were quieter, but infinitely more genuine. Throughout the week, I'd been in regular contact with each of my 14 confirmed guests, making sure they had the correct address for the Canterbury room, confirming arrival times, answering any questions. Aunt Linda had texted me Tuesday, asking if she should bring anything. Uncle Bob called to say he was proud of me for finally standing up for yourself, which told me he'd understood far more about my family dynamics over the years than he'd ever said aloud. My friend Rebecca sent a message that simply read, "I'll be there and I'm bringing the good wine." I'd gone shopping Wednesday during my lunch break, buying small but thoughtful gifts for the people who'd said yes to my relocated celebration. A mystery novel for Aunt Linda, who'd always loved them. A bottle of good bourbon for Uncle Bob. A scented candle for Rebecca. Nothing expensive or elaborate, but everything chosen with genuine care and attention to who these people actually were, not what I needed them to be. Christmas Eve morning, I wrapped these gifts at my kitchen table, taking my time with each one, folding corners, precisely curling ribbons with the edge of scissors the way my grandmother had taught me. My apartment was quiet except for the classical station playing carols softly in the background. I should have felt anxious or guilty or conflicted. Instead, I felt remarkably peaceful. This was the calmest I'd been in weeks, maybe in years. My phone buzzed periodically with messages from my mother about logistics that wouldn't matter and timing that wouldn't happen. I responded to each one with brief confirmations. Yes, I remembered. Yes, I'd be there. Yes, I was looking forward to it. The deception should have felt wrong, should have sat uncomfortably in my chest. But it didn't. It felt like the first genuinely honest thing I'd done in decades, because I was finally being honest with myself about who these people were and what I actually meant to them. At 2 p.m, my father sent a group text to me, my mother, and Danielle. "Today's the big day, can't wait to celebrate with my girls. See you at the inn at 5. He'd added 3 heart emojis and a Christmas tree. Danielle responded immediately with, "So excited, Daddy." My mother sent back, "It's going to be absolutely perfect." I looked at their messages for a long moment, then typed back the only response that was technically true. "See you soon." I didn't add enthusiasm. I didn't add emojis. Just those 3 words which carried an entirely different meaning than what they would understand. Christmas morning arrived. I'd never been more ready to celebrate. I arrived at the Riverside Inn's Canterbury room at 5:30. The smaller private dining space was warm and inviting, decorated with simple white lights and evergreen garlands the venue had provided as part of the package. Round tables were set with cream-colored linens and burgundy napkins. The room smelled like pine and cinnamon and something I could only describe as possibility. My guests began arriving shortly after, bundled-in winter coats, stamping snow off their boots in the entryway, their faces bright with curiosity and what looked like genuine affection. Aunt Linda was first, pulling me into a hug that lasted several seconds longer than usual. Uncle Bob arrived with his wife, both of them squeezing my hands and telling me I looked beautiful. Rebecca came with her husband, carrying the promised wine and wearing a smile that said she understood more than I'd told her over the phone. By 6:15, all 14 people had gathered. We stood in small clusters with drinks in hand, the comfortable murmur of real conversation filling the space. Someone asked what had prompted the change of venue, and I realized I would have to explain. I would have to say it all out loud. I asked everyone to take their seats. Once they'd settled, glasses in hand, expectant faces turned toward me. I stood at the head of the table with my hands clasped together to keep them from shaking. I told them the truth. Not every painful detail, not every small cruelty accumulated over 38 years, but enough. I explained that I'd funded this Christmas celebration with $15,000, hoping to bring our family together in a meaningful way. I described overhearing the conversation about seating arrangements, about scraps and leftovers, and being happy just to be included. I revealed that my parents had taken my Christmas money and used it for my sister's wedding deposit instead, and that the dinner they'd been planning wasn't the one I'd envisioned at all. The room was completely silent when I finished speaking. Then Aunt Linda said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years of observation, "We've watched them treat you like this your whole life. I'm glad you finally did something about it." Uncle Bob raised his glass. "To Sarah, for knowing her worth." Everyone stood, glasses lifted, voices joining in the toast. The sound of it, that chorus of people saying my name with respect and warmth and genuine caring, cracked something open inside my chest that had been sealed shut for decades. I wasn't being vindictive in that moment. I wasn't bitter or cruel. I felt free. I felt seen. For the first time in my life, I was at a family gathering where I stood at the center, not because I demanded it or manipulated anyone, but because these people had chosen to put me there. Meanwhile, 10 miles away, at the main ballroom of the same hotel, my parents and sister were discovering that sometimes the truth arrives in the form of an empty room. I would learn the details later from multiple sources, but even in that moment, I could picture it with perfect clarity. They would have arrived promptly at 5, dressed in their finest, expecting to find everything transformed into their perfect Christmas showcase. Instead, they would find a confused venue staff with no record of their reservation, no event coordinator expecting them, no guests arriving to celebrate with them. The humiliation would be swift and complete. My phone started buzzing at 6:20. I was mid-conversation with my cousin about her new job when I felt the vibration in my purse. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. By 6:30, the buzzing had become almost constant. I excused myself briefly and checked the screen. 3 missed calls from my mother, 5 from my father, 2 from Danielle. I watched another call come in, my mother's name flashing insistently, and I switched the phone to silent mode. The texts arrived in rapid succession after that. "Where are you?" from my mother in all capitals. "Sarah, call me immediately," from my father. "What is happening?" from Danielle with multiple question marks. "The venue says there's no reservation. Nobody is here. Sarah, this isn't funny. Call me now." I put the phone face down on the table and returned to my seat. Dinner was served, a beautiful meal of roasted chicken and winter vegetables, and warm bread that actually tasted like something because I was eating it with people who wanted me there. We ate slowly, talking and laughing, sharing stories. Rebecca's husband told a joke that had the entire table in tears of laughter. Aunt Linda reminisced about Christmases from my childhood before the favoritism had become so stark and undeniable. Uncle Bob asked about my recent promotion at work, and actually listened to my answer, asking thoughtful follow-up questions, treating my accomplishments as though they genuinely mattered. At 7:30, between the main course and dessert, I took out my phone one more time. 47 missed calls. 63 text messages, each one more desperate than the last. I opened my camera, aimed it at our table where everyone was leaning together and smiling, genuine joy evident on every face. I snapped the photo. Then I opened social media and posted it with a simple caption, "Grateful for the family who sees me." I put the phone away and watched as dessert was served, slices of chocolate cake and caramel cheesecake and peppermint mousse. 10 miles away, my parents and sister would be seeing that post right about now. They would be understanding finally and completely what had happened. The dinner they'd planned to host without really including me was happening without them entirely. The guests they'd wanted to impress were celebrating with me instead. The daughter they'd seated at the scraps table had taken the whole meal. The stage was set for Christmas. I just changed which play we were performing. I didn't witness what happened at the Riverside Inn's main ballroom that evening. I was 15 minutes away, surrounded by people who actually cared about me, enjoying real conversation and genuine warmth. But I heard about it afterward, pieced together from multiple sources, and even in the moment I could imagine it unfolding with perfect clarity. My parents would have arrived promptly at 5 o'clock as planned. My father hates being late to anything, especially events where he wants to make a good impression. They'd have walked through the grand entrance of the Riverside Inn dressed in their absolute best, my mother in that burgundy dress she'd bought specially for the occasion. My father in his good suit that he only wore for important events, Danielle between them in her green velvet dress. All three of them would have been wearing the particular confidence that comes from believing you're about to host the social event of the season. The confusion would have started immediately. The main ballroom was beautifully decorated for the holidays. The Riverside Inn always went all out with Christmas decor, but there was no signage indicating a Mitchell family event. No hostess stationed at the entrance checking names off a guest list. No event coordinator greeting them with clipboards and schedules. My father would have approached the front desk, given his name with that tone of authority he used when he wanted to sound important, and announced they were there for the Christmas dinner celebration. The staff member would have smiled politely, checked the computer system, then checked again with a slightly puzzled expression. Then called over a manager. The manager would have been professional and apologetic, but absolutely firm. There was no reservation under the Mitchell name, no event scheduled in the main ballroom for that evening. Perhaps there was confusion about the date, or maybe a different venue entirely. The computer showed nothing, and the ballroom was actually booked for a corporate holiday party, starting at 8. I can picture my father's face reddening, his voice rising in that particular way it does when he's embarrassed, and trying to cover it with authority and bluster. He would have insisted there must be some kind of mistake, that his daughter had arranged everything, that $15,000 had been paid for this event. The manager would have asked politely for confirmation numbers, receipts, any kind of documentation. My father would have had none of it. My mother would have been frantically digging through her purse, searching for something, anything, that proved they were supposed to be there. But I'd made all the arrangements. I had all the emails. I had all the confirmation numbers and receipts. They had nothing but their certainty and their embarrassment. Danielle, according to my cousin who heard it from someone who worked at the inn, started crying right there in the lobby. Not quiet, dignified tears, but loud, gulping sobs that drew attention from other hotel guests passing through. She kept saying something was terribly wrong, that this couldn't be happening, that her sister had made promises and arrangements. At 6 o'clock, when the first guests were supposed to start arriving, my parents stood near the ballroom entrance, watching the doors with increasingly desperate expressions. The Hendersons from church arrived, walked in, saw my parents standing there looking lost and confused in their formal wear, and after a brief awkward conversation, simply turned around and left. Mrs. Henderson would later tell Aunt Linda that my mother had tried to explain there was some kind of mix-up with the reservation, but couldn't provide any coherent details or solutions. The Hendersons had made an excuse about a sick grandchild and driven away embarrassed to have witnessed whatever family drama was unfolding. Uncle Bob never showed up at all. Neither did Aunt Linda. Neither did any of the 14 people I'd personally contacted and redirected. My parents kept calling them, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails that went unanswered, because those relatives were sitting with me in a different room of the same hotel. Their phones silenced their attention, focused on the real celebration happening without my parents' knowledge. But some people did arrive, neighbors and acquaintances from Greenfield, who'd heard through the grapevine that the Mitchell family was hosting some fancy Christmas dinner. They came out of curiosity, or obligation, or social courtesy, dressed nicely, carrying bottles of wine and small gifts. They walked into the Riverside Inn expecting an elegant party, and instead found my parents in the lobby having what appeared to be an increasingly frantic argument with hotel management, and Danielle sitting on a decorative bench with mascara running down her face in dark streaks. Mrs. Patterson, who lived 3 houses down from my parents and had known me since I was in high school, tried to ask what was happening. My mother, according to Mrs. Patterson's detailed account that she would later share with at least a dozen people, became nearly hysterical. She kept insisting her daughter had arranged everything that Sarah had promised, this would be perfect, that something terrible must have happened to me because I wasn't answering my phone. Mrs. Patterson asked where I was. My mother said she had no idea that I wasn't responding to calls or texts, that something must be wrong. Danielle stood up, then no longer crying but now visibly angry, and announced loudly to the small gathering of confused neighbors that I had sabotaged everything, that this was my fault, that I'd ruined Christmas deliberately. Several people exchanged uncomfortable glances. Someone asked why I would do such a thing. Danielle didn't have an answer that made sense. By 6:45, the hotel manager had politely but firmly asked them to leave the lobby. They were creating a disturbance, making other hotel guests uncomfortable. If they wanted to book an event for a future date, they were welcome to contact the events coordinator during business hours, but for tonight, they needed to clear the space. They left. My mother was crying. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I imagine his teeth ached. Danielle walked between them in her expensive dress, her special evening completely destroyed. 3 or 4 neighbors had witnessed the entire humiliating scene, and in a town the size of Greenfield, that was as good as 300 or 400 witnesses. The story would be all over town by morning, probably sooner. My mother tried calling more people from the car parking lot. Aunt Linda didn't pick up. Uncle Bob sent her straight to voicemail. The Hendersons didn't respond to her text messages. Cousin Jennifer ignored her call. Everyone my mother desperately tried to reach was either ignoring her or genuinely unavailable, and she had no way of knowing which. Then their phones buzzed simultaneously. 1 photo. 1 caption. Total devastation. The photo I'd posted at 7:30 was simple and unposed. 14 people gathered around a beautifully set table, faces bright with genuine happiness, glasses raised mid-toast. I was in the center, smiling wider than I had in years. The lighting was warm, the composition accidental, and therefore perfect, the kind of image that radiated authenticity, because nothing about it was staged. The caption I'd chosen was deliberate and clear: "To the family who shows up, thank you for seeing me." Within 15 minutes, 3 of my guests had shared it to their own social media accounts. Aunt Linda added her own words: "So proud of my niece for finally putting herself first. Best Christmas dinner I've attended in years." Uncle Bob's share included, "When you realize who your real family is. Sarah, you deserved this celebration." Rebecca wrote a longer caption about the courage it takes to set boundaries with toxic family members, ending with, "This woman is a warrior and I'm honored to call her my friend." Each share reached different circles of people: Aunt Linda's church friends, Uncle Bob's poker buddies and work colleagues, Rebecca's extensive college network and professional contacts. But they all had something crucial in common. They knew my family. They knew Greenfield. And they knew exactly what had happened that evening, because small towns don't keep secrets, especially not secrets involving public humiliation, at the nicest hotel in town on Christmas Eve. By 8 o'clock, my phone was flooded with notifications from people I hadn't thought about in years. Former high school classmates commenting with words of support and solidarity. Old coworkers saying they'd always admired my strength and were glad I'd finally stood up for myself. People I barely remembered from church or the grocery store or my parents' neighborhood, expressing sympathy and understanding in ways that told me my situation had been far more visible than I'd ever realized. Then the other stories started emerging, spreading through the Greenfield Community Facebook group like wildfire. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who'd witnessed the lobby meltdown, posted her own account. She didn't name my family specifically, but she didn't have to. She described arriving at the Riverside Inn for what was supposed to be an elegant Christmas dinner, finding the hosts in a state of complete panic with no event actually scheduled, witnessing what she delicately called a family situation that left her deeply uncomfortable. "Sometimes the people who give the most get treated the worst," she wrote at the end. "I hope everyone involved gets the Christmas they actually deserve." The comments on Mrs. Patterson's post multiplied with frightening speed. Someone who'd seen my parents leaving the hotel added more details about how distraught they'd looked. Someone else shared a screenshot of my photo connecting the dots explicitly. "This is about the Mitchell family," one comment read with certainty. Sarah finally stood up for herself, and good for her. The replies came fast and furious. "About time. I always wondered about that family. The way they treated that girl was never right." Jennifer Morrison, who'd been 3 years ahead of me in high school, wrote a lengthy comment about how she'd watched my parents fawn over Danielle at every single school event, while barely acknowledging my academic achievements and leadership roles. Tom Brennan, who'd worked with my father at the GM plant years ago, mentioned that Dad had once asked to borrow money from him, but said it was for his daughter's education. Tom later learned it had funded Danielle's photography hobby course, not my actual college tuition. Patterns emerged in these comments, a collective recognition of behavior that had been observed but never openly discussed. Around 9 o'clock, my mother posted on her personal Facebook page. I saw it because Aunt Linda immediately sent me a screenshot. The post was written in that breathless, defensive tone my mother used whenever she felt cornered. "There seems to be some confusion about tonight's Christmas celebration. There was an unfortunate misunderstanding with the venue that resulted in a very disappointing situation for our family. We are heartbroken that technical difficulties prevented us from hosting the evening we had planned. We hope everyone can understand that these things sometimes happen beyond our control, and we look forward to celebrating together in the new year." The post was carefully worded, diplomatically vague, designed to make them appear as victims of circumstance, rather than architects of their own humiliation. But she'd badly underestimated how quickly truth travels in the digital age, especially when multiple people know different pieces of that truth. Within minutes, guests from my actual dinner were commenting on my mother's post. Aunt Linda wrote, "There was no technical difficulty. The venue had no record of you because Sarah made all the arrangements and chose to celebrate with people who actually appreciate her." Uncle Bob added, "The only misunderstanding was you thinking you could treat your daughter like an ATM for decades without consequences." Rebecca, who'd never even met my parents in person, commented, "Trying to save face after years of mistreating your child isn't a good look. Maybe try genuine accountability instead of spin." The comments kept coming, each one stripping away another layer of my mother's carefully constructed narrative. People she knew from church, people whose opinions she valued, people who'd been part of her social circle for years, all of them publicly calling out her version of events. Within an hour, she deleted the post entirely. But screenshots live forever, and several people had already captured it and shared it with commentary about performative victimhood and narcissistic family dynamics. Danielle's response was even more dramatic. She posted and then quickly deleted a rant about how I'd betrayed the family and sabotaged Christmas out of pure jealousy, but not before multiple people screenshot it and shared it with observations about her entitlement and stunning lack of self-awareness. Her social media went completely dark by 10 o'clock, all her accounts either deleted or set to private. The last thing visible on her page before she locked it down was that morning's photo of her green velvet dress with the caption about tonight being magical. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. My phone rang constantly throughout the evening. The call log showed my mother's name appearing over and over and over, my father's number interspersed between hers, Danielle calling from what must have been Marcus's phone when I stopped answering hers. The voicemails ranged from crying to angry to pleading to threatening. How could you do this to us? Everyone is talking about us. You've humiliated your entire family. Please call back and help us explain. Sarah, this is serious and you need to fix it immediately. And they called 99 times that night. I answered once, just to say 3 words. The 3 words I said were, "Merry Christmas, Mom." That was at 8:30 while I was still at dinner while dessert was being cleared and coffee was being poured. I'd excused myself to the restroom, seen her name flashing on my screen for perhaps the 40th time, and decided to answer just long enough to let her know I was alive, and that this silence was entirely deliberate, not an emergency. Her voice had barely started forming a word before I delivered my greeting and disconnected the call. The calls continued after that. Every few minutes my phone would light up with another attempt. I turned off the vibration function so I could enjoy the rest of the evening without the constant physical reminder of their panic. By the time I drove home from the Riverside Inn at 10 o'clock, hugging each guest goodbye and thanking them for being there when it mattered, my missed call count had climbed past 70. I made myself a cup of tea when I got home, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat on my couch with my phone in my hand, scrolling through the social media chaos that had erupted in my absence. The notifications were overwhelming. Hundreds of comments, dozens of shares, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years offering support and validation. At 11 o'clock, my phone rang again. My mother's name on the screen. I looked at it for a long moment, considering whether I was ready for this conversation. Then I answered. The sound that came through was barely human at first. My mother was sobbing so hard she couldn't form coherent words, just gasping, choking sounds, punctuated by attempts at speech that dissolved immediately into wails. I held the phone slightly away from my ear and waited. Eventually, the crying subsided enough for actual words to emerge. How could you... Her voice was ragged and raw. How could you do this to us? To your own family? Do you have any idea what you've done? Everyone saw. Everyone knows. The whole town is talking about us, about me, about your father. You've made us a laughingstock. I remained silent, letting her continue. And Danielle, she went on, her voice rising again toward hysteria. You've ruined her reputation right before her wedding. People are saying terrible things about her online. She had to delete all her social media because strangers were attacking her. How is she supposed to face people now? This is vindictive, Sarah. This is cruel. I raised you better than this. Are you finished? I asked quietly when she paused for breath. Finished. How can you even ask that? You need to post something explaining this was all a mistake. You need to fix what you've broken. You need to... Did you plan to seat me at the side table with scraps? I interrupted, my voice steady and calm. The line went completely silent. I could hear her breathing shallow and quick, but no words came out. Mom, I continued in that same even tone. Did you, Dad, and Danielle plan to put me at a side table away from the main family seating to serve me after everyone else had eaten, to give me whatever food was left over? Sarah, it wasn't like that, she said, her voice thin and desperate. We had space limitations. The seating arrangement was complicated. We were trying to fit everyone, and we thought, family eats first at the good table, I recited, cutting through her excuses. She can have whatever's left over. She won't mind, that's what you said. In your kitchen, 3 days before Christmas. She made a small sound somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. You said I was just happy to be included, I went on. That I never complain. You laughed about it. You, Dad, and Danielle. You laughed. You were listening. Her voice was barely a whisper now. I came to bring you grandmother's cookies. I was going to surprise you. Instead, I got surprised. She tried to speak, but I wasn't finished. And you used my $15,000 for Danielle's wedding deposit. This silence was different. This was the silence of someone who'd been caught completely with no room left for denial or deflection. We were going to tell you, she said finally, the words rushing out. We were going to explain everything. The wedding costs were overwhelming and we were desperate, and you'd been so generous about Christmas, and we thought you wouldn't mind helping your sister, and we planned to pay you back somehow and— "Stop," I said, and she did. "Just stop." I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the city lights below. When I spoke again, my voice was quiet but absolutely clear. "You taught me my place, Mom. For 38 years, you taught me exactly where I belong in this family. You taught me that I'm the one who gives and doesn't receive, the one who shows up and doesn't get noticed, the one who should be grateful for scraps. I'm just accepting it now, on my terms." I ended the call. The phone started ringing again immediately. I turned it off completely this time, watching the screen go dark. I stood by the window for a long time, feeling something I couldn't quite name. Not satisfaction exactly, not joy, just a deep, quiet sense of having finally told a truth that needed telling. I thought that would be the end, but they weren't done humiliating themselves. I slept surprisingly well that night. When I woke up on the morning of December 26th, sunlight was streaming through my bedroom window and everything felt strangely peaceful. I made coffee, settled onto my couch with my laptop to catch up on work emails, and deliberately kept my phone turned off. I wasn't ready yet to face whatever messages had accumulated overnight. The pounding on my apartment door started at 8 o'clock sharp. It wasn't a polite knock. It was aggressive, insistent, the kind of hammering that made my neighbor's dog start barking through the wall we shared. I knew before I reached the door who it would be. Some part of me had been expecting this confrontation, though perhaps not quite so early or quite so loud. My father stood in the hallway with his face set in hard, angry lines. My mother was beside him, her eyes swollen from crying. Her hair uncombed, still wearing the same burgundy dress from last night, but now wrinkled and defeated-looking. Danielle hovered slightly behind them, her arms crossed defensively over her chest, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. "We need to talk," my father said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Now." I stepped aside and let them in, mostly because I didn't want them making a scene in the hallway where neighbors could hear. They filed into my small living room, my mother immediately claiming the armchair, my father positioning himself by the window, Danielle staying near the door as if she might need to escape quickly. My father didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You are going to fix this situation. Today. Right now. You're going to post a public explanation on social media saying there was a misunderstanding, that you made an error with the venue booking, that none of this was intentional. You're going to apologize for the confusion and embarrassment you caused." "No," I said, simply sitting down on my couch. "This isn't negotiable, Sarah." His voice rose. "Do you understand what you've done? The entire town thinks we're terrible people. Your aunt has been telling anyone who'll listen that we abused you. People we've known for 30 years are treating us like criminals. You've destroyed our reputation with your little stunt." My mother's voice was hoarse from all the crying. "Please, honey. Please just tell everyone it was a mistake. Say you got confused about the dates or the rooms or something. Give us anything we can use to make this nightmare go away." Danielle finally spoke, her voice high and trembling. "My wedding is in 7 weeks. 7 weeks. And now everyone is saying I'm a spoiled brat who steals from her sister. Marcus's parents are asking if we should postpone. My bridesmaids are texting asking if they should still be in the wedding party. You've ruined everything for me. Everything." I took a slow breath and said very quietly, "Get out of my apartment." That's when my mother lunged forward from her chair, not at me, but toward me, her hands reaching out in what might have been a pleading gesture or an attempt to grab my arms. Her purse, which had been balanced precariously on her lap, tumbled to the floor. The contents scattered across my carpet: wallet, keys, lipstick, crumpled tissues, loose change, and several papers that slid in different directions. I bent down automatically to help gather things up. My mother dropped to her knees, frantically stuffing items back into her purse with shaking hands. I picked up what looked like folded documents, intending to hand them back to her, but something about the letterhead caught my attention. Mutual of Omaha Life Insurance Policy Update. I unfolded the papers before I consciously decided to. It was a beneficiary designation form for my parents' joint life insurance policy. $500,000 in total coverage. The form was dated June 15th, 6 months ago. Under primary beneficiary, a single name, Danielle Marie Mitchell. 100% of the benefit. Nothing for me. I read it twice to be certain I understood correctly. Then I looked up at my mother, who had frozen completely, her eyes locked on the papers in my hands. "Give those back," she whispered. I stood up slowly. My father had moved away from the window, his face draining of color as he realized what I was holding. Danielle looked confused, not yet understanding what had shifted in the room. "You changed your life insurance beneficiary," I said. My voice sounded strange even to my own ears, distant and flat. 6 months ago, everything to Danielle, 100%. "Sarah, that's private family business," my father started. "You had no right." "You dropped it on my floor," I said. I held up the document so they could all see it clearly. "Danielle gets everything, even after you're gone. I was never part of your future." My neighbor Mrs. Chen chose that exact moment to step out of her apartment across the hall. She was heading out to walk her dog, but she stopped when she saw us all standing there in my doorway, saw the papers in my hand, heard my last sentence hanging in the air. Her eyes moved from my face to my parents' faces to the document I was holding. "Everything okay here, Sarah?" she asked quietly. My mother made a small, desperate sound. My father's jaw clenched. Danielle finally seemed to grasp what was happening, her face flushing red. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Chen," I said, still looking at my family. "They were just leaving." That's when I realized the dinner was just the surface. The betrayal went bone deep. I didn't let them leave. Not yet. Not like that. I stepped fully into the hallway while they were still frozen there before they could retreat to their car and regroup and construct new narratives. Mrs. Chen was still standing with her small terrier on its leash, watching us with an expression that suggested she'd sensed this moment needed a witness. "I need to say this." I began, my voice calm and steady. "Not for you. For me. Because I've spent 22 years not saying it, and I'm done with that now." My father opened his mouth, but I held up one hand and he stopped. "Since I was 16 years old, I have given you money. Thousands and thousands of dollars over more than 2 decades. I paid for Dad's truck repairs. I paid for Mom's dental work. I sent money every single month to help with bills even when I was barely making ends meet myself. I funded Danielle's photography course, her apartment deposit, her lifestyle. I never asked for anything back. I never even asked you to say thank you." My mother's face was crumpling, but I kept going. "I worked 2 jobs through high school while Danielle got to focus on being pretty and popular. I paid my own way through college while you gave her spending money. When I earned my master's degree, you called for 4 minutes and then asked for money. When Danielle dropped out of community college, you threw her a party." Danielle started to protest, but no words came out. "Last month I gave you $15,000. I thought it was for Christmas dinner, for us, for family. You took it and used it for Danielle's wedding without telling me. Then you planned to seat me at a side table with distant relatives to serve me food after everyone else had eaten their fill, to give me scraps while the real family ate first at the good table." Mrs. Chen made a small sound, something between sympathy and shock. "And this morning I discovered you've erased me from your life insurance. $500,000 all to Danielle. You didn't just prioritize her in life. You eliminated me from your death too. I was never part of your future." The silence in that hallway was absolute. I could hear the heating system humming distant traffic outside, Mrs. Chen's dog panting softly. Then my mother's knees seemed to buckle. She didn't collapse exactly, but she sank against the wall, sliding down slightly before my father caught her elbow. When she looked up at me, her face was completely destroyed, every bit of composure shattered. "You remind me of me," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I was the strong daughter too, in my family. I was the one who worked and gave and got nothing back. I hated being that." Her voice cracked. "I hated me." I stared at her, something cold settling deep in my chest. I thought if I made Danielle's life easier, she continued, struggling to speak through tears. If I protected her from having to be strong like you are, then I'd break the cycle. But I just created a different kind of damage. I made you into what I was. I gave you the life I hated because I didn't know how else to be a mother. The revelation hung in the air, toxic and tragic. My mother had seen herself in me, and instead of protecting me from her own painful experience, she'd recreated it with surgical precision while trying to save my sister from the strength she viewed as a curse. My father stood there silent. He wouldn't look at me. His hand was still on my mother's elbow, but his eyes were fixed on the carpet on the wall, on anything except my face. His silence was its own confession. He'd watched this happen for 38 years. He'd participated in it. And he had absolutely nothing to say now that it was all exposed. Danielle found her voice shrill and desperate. "This isn't fair to me. None of this is fair to me. I didn't ask to be the favorite. I didn't ask for any of this treatment. You're making me into the villain when I'm just trying to—" "You're just what?" I asked quietly. "I'm the victim here too," she said, but even she didn't sound convinced. Mrs. Chen suddenly spoke, her voice firm and clear. "I'm recording this." She held up her phone, the camera clearly pointed at all of us. "Someone needs to protect this woman, and someone needs to make sure the truth is documented." My parents' faces went white. Danielle's hand flew to her mouth. They understood instantly what this meant. Whatever happened now, whatever was said in this hallway, existed beyond their ability to control or deny or rewrite. It was evidence. It was proof. It was permanent. That sentence, "I hated me," haunted me for weeks. But it didn't excuse anything. Mrs. Chen posted her account on the Greenfield Community Facebook group that same afternoon. I didn't see it immediately because I'd stepped back from social media, needing space to process everything that had happened. But Aunt Linda called me around 3 o'clock to tell me about it. Her voice a mixture of concern and satisfaction. Mrs. Chen's post was measured and factual, the kind of testimony that carries weight precisely because it doesn't editorialize or exaggerate. She described what she'd witnessed in the hallway of her Indianapolis apartment building, a family confronting a young woman on the morning after Christmas, the accidental discovery of life insurance documents that excluded that same woman entirely from a $500,000 policy, the mother's confession about repeating generational patterns of mistreatment, and the daughter's calm recitation of decades of financial exploitation. She included the detail about recording the encounter, noting she'd done so because she feared for my safety and wanted documentation in case I needed it for legal protection later. The post ended with a single observation. "I've lived 72 years and watched a lot of family dynamics. I've never seen someone treated so poorly by the people who should love them most." Within hours, the Greenfield First Methodist Church community was discussing it extensively. Several longtime members I remembered from childhood expressed shock and disappointment in the comments. Mrs. Harriet Walsh, who'd taught Sunday school for over 40 years, wrote that she'd be having a serious conversation with the pastor about certain members who preach family values on Sunday but practice something very different the rest of the week. Another member mentioned that my parents had recently volunteered to coordinate the church's annual charity auction, and perhaps that responsibility should be reconsidered given their demonstrated relationship with money and family obligations. By the following Sunday, Aunt Linda reported that my parents had sat completely alone in their usual pew. No one joined them before the service. No one spoke to them afterward. They left through the side door while the rest of the congregation gathered for coffee hour in the fellowship hall, their absence noted by everyone present. Danielle's consequences arrived more swiftly and more personally. Marcus's mother, a sharp woman who worked as an accountant and had never warmed to my sister, apparently saw all the Facebook posts and started asking pointed questions. If Danielle had made a $15,000 wedding venue deposit in early December and the money had come from her sister under what was clearly false pretenses, where exactly had those funds originated? Marcus called Danielle demanding answers she couldn't provide honestly without admitting to the theft. His parents called him, expressing serious concerns about marrying into a family with such troubling ethical issues. His younger sister, who was supposed to be a bridesmaid, quietly removed herself from the wedding party.